Hey everyone, per your requests, I'm starting Sword of Coming. Chapters 401 through 410 of the previous episode. Chen Ping'an and Lu Tai journey north through Parasol Leaf Continent, but soon realize they are being trailed by an organized group of assassins. Realizing an ambush is imminent, they stop and confront their pursuers. During the ensuing bloody battle, Chen faces an incredibly tough martial artist augmented by demonic techniques. Unveiling his hidden magical defenses and deploying his flying swords, Chen eventually gains the upper hand, pushing the burly assassin to his absolute limit. If you're able to, please support me on PayPal to help me stay active. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Chapter 411. The autumn sun was warm, and Lu Tai was sitting in the courtyard and playing out games of Go from the manuals by himself. Chen Ping'an was practicing techniques from the proper sword scripture nearby. The Flying Eagle Fortress didn't violate their privacy anymore after Lu Tai detected the spy from the fortress last time. Seizing the opportunity when Chen Ping'an momentarily stopped practicing his sword techniques, Lu Tai suddenly asked, "Chen Ping'an, should I teach you how to play Go?" Chen Ping'an was still rotating his wrists and searching for the smoothest and most suitable sword-holding posture to defend against surprise variations in attacks. He needed to seek change in the finest areas if he wanted his sword strikes to become quicker. This followed the same principle as the extremely profound jumping Buren technique in pottery firing. At a rough glance, it would seem as if the technique was focused on not moving. In reality, however, this wasn't the case. Chen Ping'an shook his head upon hearing Lu Tai's suggestion, replying, "Forget about it. I've learned how to play Go before, but I'm still no good at it. I witnessed Grandmaster Go players during my first distant trip, and I still prefer to watch others play than play myself." There was Lin Shui Xie Yu Lu, and the young imperial preceptor who had changed his name to Cui Dongshan. Each of them was more skilled at Go than the other. Chen Ping'an often watched them playing Go, yet he was still unable to decipher whether a move was good or bad, and what kind of short-term or long-term strategies the two sides were employing. Thus, he felt that he didn't have any talent when it came to playing Go. Even so, he still enjoyed watching games of Go just like how he enjoyed watching Lu Tai brew tea. These were all very pleasant experiences. During his journey to the Great Sui Nation, Chen Ping'an had also enjoyed watching the games of Go between Lin Shuyi and Xie. Chen Ping'an felt like the meditative state that people entered when playing Go was very beautiful. Lu Tai didn't dwell on Chen Ping'an's refusal to learn, and he asked with a smile, "Do you know what the peak state of playing Go is?" Lu Tai pinched a Go piece and placed it on the board before saying with a fervent expression in his eyes, "To have no one in front." Chen Ping'an ruminated on this for a moment before nodding in understanding. Emichim. It was Lu Tai's turn to be surprised, and he raised his head and shot a sideways glance at Chen Ping'an, asking, "You genuinely understand this?" Chen Ping'an slowly walked around the courtyard, bringing his qi to his dantian and allowing his fist intent to pour into the surroundings. This appeared unremarkable at first glance, yet in reality the young boy had already reached a state where his aura was vast and quiet like deep water. Chen Ping'an smiled and replied, "A certain person's sword techniques and the fist techniques of the old man who helped me temper my third tier of martial arts all exuded this feeling. Just like you said, to have no one in front." Lu Tai faltered slightly. This was the case even though Lu Tai had witnessed far too many interesting people and beautiful scenes, extravagant decorations and lavish food, noble people and powerful people, graceful people and carefree people, and immortals who treated clouds as food and dew as drink. Regardless of all this, watching Chen Ping'an practice fist techniques was still a form of enjoyment. However, Lu Tai felt like Chen Ping'an could do even better. He stood up and took a deep breath. For wisps of white air slowly drifted out from his nose and ears, yet they didn't drift away nor did they disperse. Instead, they were like four slender white pythons hanging upside down on Lu Tai's face. Chen Ping'an was slightly confused. He didn't know what Lu Tai was trying to do. Lu Tai walked to the middle of the courtyard and slowly explained, "Pure martial artists temper qi, and qi refiners also nurture and temper qi. As we breathe and meditate, we can't escape from the matter that is qi. When describing mortals, the phrase qi as thin as a thread implies that one is reaching the end of their life. However, this phrase has a completely different meaning when used to describe sword cultivators." Lu Tai exhaled slowly, causing his qi to condense into silk-like threads. In the end, these threads transformed into a miniature sword in front of him. Lu Tai gently blew the sword. Chen Ping'an's heart jolted, and he quickly turned his head to the side. A burst of white light rapidly shot past his ear. Afterward, the extremely slender burst of white light started to furiously whiz around the courtyard, leaving trails of very slow dispersing light in its wake. Before long, it was as if the courtyard had been transformed into a cage formed from sword qi. It was like a pool of lightning that was permeating with intense sword qi. Lu Tai stomped his foot, causing the peculiar phenomenon to instantly vanish. The handsome young man smiled faintly and said, "I understand the principles even though I'm not a pure martial artist. You're obsessively practicing one of the most ordinary fist techniques, and you've actually managed to practice it more than 1,000,000 times. As a result, your fist intent is completely smooth and natural. In reality, however, you fail to understand the true intent hidden within it." Lu Tai turned to Chen Ping'an, holding one hand behind his back and extending one hand forward with his palm outstretched. Apart from strengthening one's tendons, bones, qi, and blood and nurturing one's soul and intent, the truly mystical nature of fist techniques is their true qi that doesn't draw from the power of heaven and earth, but instead seeks to command heaven and earth. This burst of true qi is compact, and allows one's punch to be unreasonably fast. Lu Tai threw a punch, with his fist aura causing an explosive boom that triggered a subsequent series of tearing sounds. Lu Tai threw another punch, this time on a slight angle. His fist then hooked around, finishing in the same spot as his previous punch. This punch was silent rather than explosive, yet the air that had come into contact with his fist collapsed in an astonishing manner. "I used the same strength and intent for both punches," Lu Tai explained. "My first punch traveled straight and appeared to take the shortest path, yet the situation was actually similar to traversing mountains and rivers. The fastest path isn't necessarily the shortest one, but rather the one that follows the mountain paths and the flow of the rivers. As such, trying to take the shortest path might actually slow you down." It's said that the genuine end tier for martial Tao is the 10th tier. If one advances further, however, one will reach the martial god tier. This paramount martial god tier is one that even qi refiners envy and fear. Lu Tai retracted his fist and sighed. Looking up at the sky with an adrift expression, he continued, "Chaos has already started to sweep through the world. You have to stay alive, Chen Ping'an. If you can live until the end, then..." Blood started to seep from the corners of Lu Tai's mouth, yet he still insisted on saying, "You definitely have to stay alive and resolutely defend that place. Make sure to prevent yourself from being swept up and coerced by the unstoppable trend. You have to become that unwavering pillar. When the time comes, you'll receive help from all sides and even from heaven and earth. Don't limit your vision to short-term gains. I'm confident that you can walk further than Chao Ci, and I'm confident that you can rebuild your bridge of immortality and become a great sword immortal. Divine secrets couldn't be revealed." Perhaps this was a casual and joking remark often uttered by ordinary qi refiners. However, this was not the case for naturalist disciples. Those who were skilled in divination, fortune-telling and horoscopes often wouldn't die a peaceful death. Some occasionally would, yet they didn't need to dream about their children and descendants receiving any ancestral blessings. In fact, it was even possible for these people to use up their descendants' fortunes, and thus cause harm to those after them. Chen Ping'an could already sense the severity of the situation, so he quietly shouted, "That's enough, Lu Tai." Lu Tai nodded and wiped the blood from his mouth using the back of his hand. After returning to his seat beside the stone table, he flashed a dazzling smile at the young boy and said, "Since I've found this place and found the ascending sun platform in the Flying Eagle Fortress, you'll need to continue your journey by yourself after this." Chen Ping'an sat beside Lu Tai and replied with a nod, "I'll travel north by myself after we finish dealing with the matters here. You don't need to worry about me. Do you have any plans?" Lu Tai asked. Chen Ping'an smiled and explained, "In the short term, I want to find the ruins of an ancient battlefield and look for the heroic spirits of those lingering souls. I need to temper my 3 souls to solidify the foundation of my 4th tier of martial arts. In the long term, I want to continue practicing fist techniques with that old man after I return home. That way, I can advance my cultivation in a steadier manner, and thus increase my chance of reaching the 7th tier of martial arts." Lu Tai nodded and said, "I'm fine, you don't need to worry about me. This kind of backlash from the heavenly Tao is nothing more than a common snack for members of the Lu clan. Chen Ping'an finally felt reassured after confirming that Lu Tai wasn't downplaying his injuries. He wrapped his hands behind his head and slowly said, "There's also something that I've thought about but haven't had the time to do. I want to pave a new road for my hometown, the type that has a resting pavilion every 7 or 8 kilometers. My heart won't ache regardless of how much money I have to spend. It's just a path, so how much money can it cost?" Lu Tai asked with a huff. No wonder his 2 bonded flying swords were called Needle Tip and Wheat On. By the looks of it, he was innately fond of nitpicking and arguing with others. Chen Ping'an didn't argue with Lu Tai, and he continued, "When I return home, I'm going to make an attempt to personally manage my 2 stores in Dragon Riding Alley. I'll be happy as long as I make some money, even if it's only a few copper coins every day. Then there's also those damaged statues of deities in the immortal tomb. Even though I had already addressed some of the issues the last time I returned home, building many sheds and repairing the statues a little, this is still far from enough. I still need to formally rebuild their golden bodies for them." "Is this why you purchased those books about carving statues?" Lu Tai asked. I need to learn as much about the rules and taboos of creating statues as I can, lest I perform bad deeds with good intentions." "You sure are busy," Lu Tai remarked with a smile. Chen Ping'an was gazing into the distance the entire time and he asked, "Do you want to hear my plans that are even longer term?" "Go on. I'll jump into some well to cleanse myself if your plans are too preposterous and end up polluting my ears," Lu Tai replied. Chen Ping'an paid no heed to the handsome young man's teasing remark, and he began, "I want to construct more buildings beside the bamboo building that's located in my hometown's downtrodden mountain. I want them to stretch from the foot of the mountain. Forget about that. I want them to stretch from the waist of the mountain all the way to the peak of the mountain. I want these buildings to have all of those things that you mentioned before. Eave tiles, drip tiles, overhangs, caisson ceilings, and mortise and tenon connections." Chen Ping'an raised a hand and vigorously gestured in the air as he said this. Lu Tai rolled his eyes and exclaimed, "Such grand and terrifying ambitions." Chen Ping'an felt a little disheartened. Lu Tai hurriedly raised his hands and relented. Okay, please continue. I won't tease you anymore." Only after hearing this did Chen Ping'an continue, "I want to buy a lot of books, classics from the 3 sages, teachings from the 100 schools of thought, and literary works composed by virtuous people of the past. I want to collect all of these." Before Jewel's small world shattered and fell, you can't imagine how difficult it was to obtain even a single book in impoverished areas like Clay Vase Alley, the alley where I lived. It was even more difficult than coming across a single grain of silver. I want there to be all kinds of large buildings and small buildings in my mountains, and I want these buildings to be filled with all kinds of spirit tools and immortal treasures. I want to collect local specialties from all of the myriad nations in the world, things like embroidered gowns and cockfighting cups from colorful garment nation. I want to collect lively and adorable spirits that can help people dress and apply makeup, spirits that can stand on the branches of potted plants and cup their fists, spirits that can open doors to welcome guests, and so on. I want to raise all kinds of unique and wonderful plants, have tall mountains and flowing rivers, construct pavilions and pagodas, plant bamboo forests for cultivation, and have seas of clouds roll past the mountains every day. Li Baoping and Li Huai can peacefully study there, Lin Shui can earnestly cultivate there, Yu Lu can reach the peak of martial arts and study fist techniques with Mr. Cui there, Xie Xie can avoid being bullied by Cui Dongshan there, the little boy in azure and the little girl in pink can either cultivate or slack off as they please there, and Ruan Xiu can visit frequently and enjoy desserts from my shop there. On the 1st and 15th day of the new year, many local residents can go to the mountain god temple in downtrodden mountain to offer incense. I want to make the mountain path wider, and I want to pave it with blue stone slabs like Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley. That way, people won't need to worry about their shoes getting muddy even when it rains. In fact, I'll prepare many raincoats and bamboo hats in the mountain god temple so the local residents don't need to be afraid even if it does suddenly start to rain. They can borrow these things and return them the next time they visit the mountain god temple to offer incense. No matter what the world turns into, no matter what life is like outside the mountains, no matter what the situation is like in other mountains, I simply hope that everyone in my mountains will cherish each other, and live happily every single day. I wish that those beside me won't suffer like Lu Xianying anymore, feeling like they can't do anything to improve the situation, and feeling like others won't listen to us even when we're correct. In the future we'll improve the situation and we'll make these people listen, even if that means using our fists or using our swords. Lu Tai quietly listened to the young boy's dreams. It was as if he were watching Qian Ping'an build a snowman on a scorching summer day. Lu Tai pointed at the courtyard door after listening to Qian Ping'an speak, and he said that after sticking the treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talisman there, the world beyond the door was the cultivation world while the world inside the door was the mountains. Qian Ping'an wanted to drink wine after hearing this. The Flying Eagle Fortress became very lively after this, breathing an air of life into the fortress. The Flying Eagle Fortress was clearly more calming now compared to its near-deathly peaceful state before. This was because two powerful people had arrived from the outside world. They weren't gallant martial artists who traveled around the world, a type of people that the Flying Eagle Fortress was familiar with, nor were they renowned martial arts grandmasters. Instead, they were very mysterious cultivators who were even stranger than the already strange administrator He. This was a very fresh experience for everyone. The middle-aged man whom the fortress lord had warmly invited over walked through the streets and alleys of the Flying Eagle Fortress with his white horse. There were two large bundles of cypress and pine branches hanging from the sides of the saddle, and the man with the fly whisk in his hand would grab and burn a branch each time he came to a stop with his horse. However, he didn't seem to need flint, with the branches combusting by themselves when he rubbed his fingers together. The branches released a fragrant smoke as they burned. There were some white-haired elders who were slightly knowledgeable about old practices in the crowd of local residents watching this from a distance, and these elders started to show off their knowledge, claiming that this was called courtyard illumination, an incredible type of immortal technique that could exorcise evil and eliminate filth. Pine trees were also called the 18th Duke, because they were the most senior type of trees. This was equivalent to being a country duke of the imperial court. Meanwhile, cypress trees were like nobles who were only one rank beneath pine trees. This was especially the case with those cypress trees from famous mountains. As a result, reciting immortal mantras while burning pine and cypress branches could summon divine power. Elsewhere, the disheveled old man appeared far more basic compared to the tall and sturdy middle-aged man with a fly whisk and a white horse. His appearance was inferior to his fellow cultivator, and his techniques also exuded a rustic aura. Thus, few local residents of the Flying Eagle Fortress rushed over to watch the old man. The disheveled old man wasn't wearing a Taoist robe, and he didn't know how to draw talismans and perform Taoist rituals using proper Taoist walking patterns either. Instead, he simply asked people to bring him 7 or 8 roosters, after which he hung them on the fortress gate, the doors of the ancestral hall, next to the wells in the martial arts training grounds and so on. Afterward, he kept a keen eye on these roosters from morning until night. There was a small rice bag tied to his hip, one that was filled with glutinous rice. There was also a pot of water next to it. These were for the roosters, and the water wasn't ordinary well water that the residents of the fortress drank every day. Rather, it was spring water that his disciple, Huang Shang, had retrieved from the depths of some mountain in the distance. Qian Ping'an and Lu Tai split up. Lu Tai liked to watch that so-called esteemed immortal from Peace and Tranquility Mountain pretending to be mysterious, while Qian Ping'an headed elsewhere to observe the disheveled old man's techniques. Laymen watched for fun, while cultivators watched to determine one's skills. Even though Qian Ping'an wasn't sure about the origins of the old man's techniques, he could tell that the yin energy and murderous aura had become slightly weaker after the disheveled old man finished hanging the roosters in the different locations. This was like a face-off between two armies. One side was avoiding the other's attacks, and this was an exchange where neither side would suffer any casualties. The party harming the fortress was simply hiding in the dark and accumulating power. Judging from the old man's extremely anxious expression as he fed the roosters glutinous rice and water, it was clear that he had also noticed some clues. Thus he wasn't feeling relaxed at all. As for the middle-aged man who was swaggering through the streets and alleys with his fly whisk, his expression was calm and composed as if he could annihilate all evil beings with a quick snap of his fingers. Huan Chong and Huan Shu were responsible for clearing the path for this middle-aged man. Tao Xiang coughed very frequently, and his face was also as pale as a sheet. He walked behind the old Taoist priest with Huang Shang. Lu Tai didn't reveal the cultivation bases of the two people, and he only said that the middle-aged man definitely wasn't a chi refiner from Parasol Leaf Continent's Peace and Tranquility Mountain or whatnot. On the other hand, the disheveled old man was a legitimate Taoist priest from the mountains who studied Tao in seclusion and serenity, choosing to live in peace with the mountains and waters as his neighbors. Peace and Tranquility Mountain was the most powerful sect in the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent. In fact, it was as strong if not stronger than Planchette Writing Sect. However, it was secluded to the level that it almost detested interaction with the outside world, so extremely few disciples of this sect ever left the mountains and traveled around the outside world. This sect accepted and synthesized the knowledge and techniques of all branches of alchemy, and Lu Tai had heard of this sect even though he was from Middle-earth Divine Continent. It was just that Peace and Tranquility Mountain was nowhere near as renowned as Parasol Leaf Sect or Jade Tablet Sect. Another 2 days passed by peacefully. On this day, however, even the common residents living in the streets and alleys of the Flying Eagle Fortress noticed the strangeness of the sky. At dawn, when the sun should have risen from the east, there were instead layers of rolling black clouds blanketing the sky above the Flying Eagle Fortress. It was as if black clouds were a living being baring its fangs and brandishing its claws at the fortress below, exuding such immense pressure that everyone felt a heavy weight on their heart. Administrator Hiya, also responsible for teaching the younger generation in the fortress, announced that there wouldn't be class today. He told his students to make haste and return home. This caused the little children to cheer in joy. They returned home in pairs or groups, pointing at the black clouds and chattering as they did so. Some children said the clouds looked like a centipede, while some children said the clouds looked like an ox. In the end, the appearance of a black cloud that looked like the face of a wicked woman petrified the children and caused them to immediately scatter and run home. Chun Ping'an was practicing fist techniques in the small courtyard, and he noticed the peculiar phenomenon in the sky right from the very beginning. Lu Tai was sitting beside the stone table and forming hand seals, quietly performing divination with a calm and composed expression. It was morning when the sun should have been hanging high and shining bright, yet the sky was so dark that the fortress was seemingly still in the depths of night. Not a single ray of sunshine was able to reach the Flying Eagle Fortress. Chun Ping'an heard eerie laughter drifting back and forth along the small alley outside the courtyard again. He stopped practicing fist techniques and ran over to open the courtyard door, turning around to look at the demon-suppressing talisman that was created from ordinary talisman paper. As the days passed, the talisman had also continued to lose its spiritual energy. Right now, the talisman was already dim and lusterless, with the initially yellow talisman paper extremely wrinkled and losing much of its color like a New Year couplet that had been subject to the elements for more than half a year. There were also a few spots that had become ink black. It was no wonder those ghosts and entities dared to reappear and provoke them again. Lu Tai walked out with his hands inside his opposite sleeves. He stood beside Chun Ping'an and looked up at the deteriorating talisman, murmuring to himself, far back in the ancient past, talismans drawn by those equivalent to 7th-tier martial artists could only be regarded as talismans that had just captured a modicum of essence. Only talismans drawn by those equivalent to 9th-tier martial artists could be considered genuine talismans. From this, one can imagine the immense might of talismans back at that time. Among them, the obscure and difficult-to-understand Master of 3 Mountains and 9 Lords was regarded as the representation of talismanic orthodoxy. However, it's a shame that future generations like us don't even know what this actually means. Is this someone's name? Or is this someone's title? Chun Ping'an stood on tippy toes and peeled the talisman from the door, placing it back inside his sleeve. Loud noises instantly appeared in the surroundings, with wisps of mist also rising from the mud path of the small alley and rapidly permeating through the surroundings. Starting from feet height, the mist eventually rose to knee height before quickly rushing to waist height. It was as if Chun Ping'an had opened the lid of a piping hot wok, causing wisps of curling vapor to immediately rush into the surroundings. However, the vapor from a wok would be hot and fragrant, while the mist in the small alley was sticky and cold. This mist also gave off a fishy and pungent smell. Chun Ping'an turned around and looked over, and he saw that the mist fortunately didn't rush into the courtyards of the common residents in a single burst. However, the various styles of door gods, martial sages, literary sages, and other gods, plastered on everyone's courtyard doors immediately started to crackle softly, with their already measly spiritual energy vanishing into nothingness. These door gods were no longer able to protect the owners of the courtyards. Once again, Qian Ping'an saw the adult and the child in white mourning clothes appear at the end of the small alley. The little child was still staring at Qian Ping'an, and there was blood continually trickling from his bright red eyes and flowing down his snow-white face. However, the blood didn't drip onto the ground, and it instead crawled around the little child's face like numerous squirming worms. They entered and exited the child's eyes, and it was as if they were treating his eyes as their nests. The adult holding the little child's hand surprisingly didn't have any features on his face. It was as if a thick white cloth were covering his face and concealing his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Many other harrowing and filthy entities shuffled toward the small courtyard at the end of the alley. There was an expressionless old woman hunched over with her hands and feet on the ground, and she nimbly crawled across the courtyard walls and continually murmured to Qian Ping'an that she wanted to eat meat. There were also many little children squatting in front of the courtyard walls with their hands wrapped around their legs, and their heads resting on their knees. Sounds of intermittent weeping hissed out from between their teeth and drifted in the wind, as if they wanted to recount their tragic stories yet were too young to properly speak and tell their truths. Qian Ping'an genuinely wasn't afraid of these entities even though he had respected ghosts and gods since a young age. Could one imagine a little child, 4 or 5 years old, running to the immortal tomb by himself whether it was sunny or raining? After starting to practice fist techniques, the little boy who had now become a youngster had then embarked on 3 long journeys, including this journey to Parasol Leaf Continent. During his journeys, just how many bizarre and wonderful things had he witnessed? That being the case, would he still be afraid of something? Hence, Qian Ping'an was unfazed even when the adult and the little child slowly walked over and arrived outside the courtyard gate. In fact, he even strode forward and stood on the edge of the steps as if waiting for them to make the first move. The little child with squirming blood on his face stared at Qian Ping'an the entire time. When he turned his head to lock gazes with Qian Ping'an, he asked, "Your meat is very fragrant. Can I take a few bites? I only want half of your heart. Can I have it?" The little child spoke very slowly, and also continued to shuffle forward as he spoke. When he said the word heart, his back was already facing Qian Ping'an, and his head was already turned 180 degrees. He kept his eyes firmly fixed on Qian Ping'an, and he even stuck his pitch-black tongue out to lick the blood on his lips. However, it was the old woman crawling along the courtyard walls who made a move first, bouncing off the walls and lunging at Qian Ping'an. Qian Ping'an didn't so much as glance at her as he strode forward and descended the steps. He then threw a casual punch before his boot even made contact with the muddy alley path, striking the old woman's head and sending the entity flying back and crashing into the opposite wall, exploding into smithereens before she could even wail in anguish. The entities in the small alley immediately exploded with wild ferocity upon seeing this, causing black smoke to churn and rush forward as they furiously lunged at Qian Ping'an. These entities were all formed from the resentful emotions of deceased people. Qian Ping'an held his left hand inside his sleeve and behind his back, using only his right hand to fight against these beings. His fist intent was extremely well controlled, only flowing through his right arm and only releasing enough power to defeat his opponents. His aura was also condensed and not radiating into the surroundings. As a result, he was able to obliterate a violently attacking entity with each punch that he threw. To the Qian Ping'an of today, unleashing this amount of fist intent was the same as drawing just a single bucket of water from a deep well. From the view of the entities, however, the young boy in white's right arm looked much like a brilliant and blinding ray of sunshine cutting through the darkness. Almost 80% of the furiously charging entities in the small alley were obliterated in just a few seconds. At some unknown time, Lu Tai had walked over and sat down on the door threshold, his hands in his opposite sleeves and a smile on his face as he spectated. The little child who said he wanted to eat Qian Ping'an's heart broke free from the accompanying adult's grip and arrived behind Qian Ping'an in a flash. He then slashed at Qian Ping'an's back with his palm, attempting to dig out the young boy's heart. The little child's palm strike was viciously quick, and he mistakenly thought that he was just about to succeed. However, it was at this moment that he started to howl in agony. As it turned out, It was as if he had thrust his hand into a furnace after his fingers came into contact with Qian Ping'an's white robe. A large section of his arm instantly disintegrated like snow melting in the heat. Qian Ping'an's left hand remained unmoving behind his back, keeping watch on the Yin entity without facial features out of the corners of his eyes the entire time. Qian Ping'an then leaned back and crashed into the little child, causing golden sweet wine to immediately melt the little child as if he were a candle. The little child transformed into a wisp of extremely pure black smoke, and was just about to shoot into the distance. However, Qian Ping'an quickly turned around and flicked his wrist, throwing a hook punch and crushing the head and tail of the wisp of smoke. "Now you're just bullying people," Lu Tai said in amusement. Qian Ping'an pursed his lips and replied, "How are they people?" Qian Ping'an suddenly turned around and looked toward the end of the small alley. There was well water filled with Yin energy crawling up the wall of the well in a neighboring street. It concealed itself using the mist permeating through the street, and it rapidly flowed out from the well and poured toward the alley where Qian Ping'an was located. After entering the alley, the well water was just in time to see Qian Ping'an suppressing the little child. After hesitating for a brief moment, the well water surprisingly started to recede from the alley. Qian Ping'an brought his right hand out of his sleeve, pinching a brand new treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talisman and calling for 15th in his mind. An exquisite dark green sword flew out from his sword-nurturing gourd and rushed past his back, catching the yellow paper talisman on its tip before shooting into the distance and leaving a trail of golden talisman radiance in its wake. This talisman had initially been reserved for the adult Yin entity, who had come with the little child. After battling with the attacking Yin entities, however, Qian Ping'an was much more reassured than before. His fists would be more than enough. Since the strange entity in the well had decided to rush over by itself, Qian Ping'an responded in kind by summoning 15th and having it carry a demon-suppressing talisman over. He was going to suppress the well water and sever its path of retreat. The well water receded extremely quickly, but how could it possibly be quicker than the flying sword 15th? After arriving beside the well that was seemingly weeping like an aggrieved woman, 15th stabbed down and pinned the dazzling golden treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talisman onto the edge of the well opening. The flying sword then slowly rose into the air and circled around the well. The well water that had climbed out from the well rippled as it covered the surroundings, revealing the twisted faces of many women with bitter and resentful expressions. At the same time, a small trickle of well water broke from the main puddle and rushed toward the well, unwilling to accept this fate. However, this trickle of well water was quickly turned into vapor and mist. 15th naturally viewed this as an act of provocation. It pierced through the Yin entity's head before suddenly coming to a stop and flying back to pierce through the Yin entity's back. It did this again and again, enjoying itself and not tiring of it at all. Perhaps it hadn't imagined that the flying sword would be brimming with so much sword intent, so the well water that had just assumed a humanoid form quickly dispersed with a splash, once again transforming into a puddle of water that flowed in all directions. It started to ripple and flee. However, 15th didn't care about this as it continued to stab the well water again and again. A hint of apprehension radiated from the male Yin entity who had hoped to cloak himself in the well water. He lost the will to fight against Qian Ping'an, and he immediately rushed toward the wall located at the end of the small alley. Qian Ping'an stomped his foot and leaped forward, arriving at the wall before the male Yin entity. He then launched a palm strike at the wall in the dead end. This was another demon-suppressing talisman. The wall instantly revealed its true form. It was stacked high with skeletons, with many of them belonging to very young children. In fact, some skeletons seemingly belonged to infants who had been cut out from their mother's womb. This was a harrowing and tragic sight. The children squatting in front of the wall and holding their heads in their hands immediately started to sob when this wall was exposed. There was raging hatred and anger in Qian Ping'an's mind when he saw this. The male Yin entity was just about to soar into the air and escape from the small alley, yet his featureless face was immediately grabbed by the young boy who had turned around in incandescent rage. Qian Ping'an's fingers were like talons, and the sleeves of golden sweet wine billowed as they released waves of divine light that had seemingly enjoyed incense for 1,000 years. The male Yin entity released desperate prayers and anguished wails from the depths of its soul. Yet Qian Ping'an held it still with his right hand before blasting its heart apart with his left. Golden light burst from his arm. filled with his fist aura and also radiating with golden sweet wine's spiritual energy. Qian Ping'an moved his right arm around, forcefully creating a gaping hole in the Yin entity's chest. However, this still wasn't enough, and Qian Ping'an even desired to tear the Yin entity's soul apart. He purposely controlled his power such that the Yin entity's soul was peeled back layer by layer, as if it were being subject to the punishment of being skinned and having its tendons pulled out. He dragged the Yin entity's soul into his Dao robe bit by bit, forcing it to endure agonizing pain as if it were being cut by 10,000 blades. Lu Tai stood up and warned the young boy in a quiet voice, saying, "That's enough, Qian Ping'an." Qian Ping'an took a deep breath and released his grip, drawing his right hand from the Yin entity's chest. He then threw a punch and smashed it into oblivion. Afterward, he violently flicked his sleeve and collected all of the remnant wisps of the Yin entity. In the end, he shook his sleeve and poured out the extremely fine particles of rustling ashes. Qian Ping'an glanced forward at the Yin entity children squatting in front of the wall. They didn't flee, and they were simply trembling in fear. They shuddered violently, yet they still hugged their knees with all their strength as they waited for death. There was a sobbing tone to their murmuring, but it was unclear what they were crying about, as if they were suffering immense pain and torture. Qian Ping'an turned around and glanced at the talisman stuck on the wall of skeletons. He hurriedly walked over and pulled it down. After putting the demon-suppressing talisman away, Qian Ping'an covered more than 20 meters in a single step and arrived beside a Yin entity child squatting there with his head in his hands. The child was only 2 to 3 years old. Qian Ping'an reached over, yet the child shuddered increasingly violently even though Qian Ping'an was already doing his best to hold back his fist intent and the spiritual energy of golden sweet wine. He was trying his best to suppress golden sweet wine and make it seem like an ordinary robe. Qian Ping'an hurriedly rolled his sleeves up upon seeing this, so high that they almost reached his shoulders. He then gently patted the little child's head. Qian Ping'an didn't say anything. There existed all kinds of pains and hardships in the world, with some being inescapable karmic retributions from past lives. However, should these things not wait until the children grew slightly older and understood slightly more things? Qian Ping'an felt wasn't right. He felt wasn't good. This was because he could empathize with their pain. Qian Ping'an retracted his hand and wiped the corners of his eyes. He turned to Lu Tai and asked, "Is there anything we can do?" Lu Tai slowly walked over, no longer appearing as carefree and nonchalant as always. He nodded and replied, "You know how to draw the Yang Energy Illumination Talisman, right? This talisman will become a guide for Yin energy if you draw it in reverse. I can also draw a Netherworld Fairy Talisman, and that way we'll be able to release the souls of these children from suffering. The purpose of your talisman is to persuade these young and immature entities to stand up and walk by themselves, while the purpose of my talisman is to open a door for them and provide them with a path that doesn't lead to a dead end." Qian Ping'an quietly called out to 15th in his mind. The flying sword quickly returned from the entrance of the small alley. Qian Ping'an retrieved a piece of yellow talisman paper, as well as the wind and snow all from his pocket treasure. He then sat down cross-legged with the brush in one hand and the talisman paper in his other. Following Lu Tai's guidance, Qian Ping'an made his first attempt to draw the Yang Energy Illumination Talisman in reverse. However, he ultimately failed because of his unstable mental state. Lu Tai didn't say anything, and Qian Ping'an took a deep breath before retrieving another piece of talisman. Surprisingly, however, he failed once again. This was extremely rare for Qian Ping'an, especially since he had started to practice fist techniques. Even Qian Ping'an was at a slight loss. Lu Tai sighed softly. This was because a shard of Qian Ping'an's mind's realm was shuddering. Lu Tai decided to retrieve his bamboo folding fan, gently rocking it back and forth. He smiled faintly and didn't look at Qian Ping'an as he suggested, "Don't put yourself in other people's shoes all the time. You should learn to observe problems as an outsider. There's no rush to draw the talisman. These children have already suffered for so many years, so they most likely won't mind if they have to wait for a little longer." Lu Tai offered a gentle breeze with his folding fan, helping this small alley now devoid of mist and Yin energy to once again block out the formless Yang energy that was seeping through the black clouds overhead. "I'm going to directly head to the main bamboo building to look for the fortress lord's wife when we finish dealing with the matters here," Lu Tai said slowly. Chen Ping'an, you don't need to come with me. I need you to help me scatter those black clouds, as well as those entities hiding in the dark. Their cultivation base might be a bit higher. In any case, you don't need to worry about me. Chen Ping'an nodded in understanding. Lu Tai looked up at the sky and said, I can roughly confirm the truth now. The Flying Eagle Fortress has ended up in this state where yin energy is dominant and yang energy is inferior in these past few decades, because of someone's purposeful actions. Their aim is to have the fortress lord's wife, who possesses an innate physique of extreme yin energy, give birth to a ghost infant, an extremely rare type of existence. Ghost infants are born from a woman's heart, and they need to be nurtured for several years, feeding on the blood and vitality of their host. This is very different from an ordinary pregnancy of 9 months. There's a common saying, ghost in one's heart, and this is the exact situation that the saying refers to. 1. The fortress lord's wife isn't a cultivator, meaning that she lacks the vital energy to nurture this ghost infant by herself. That's the reason for all of these strange happenings in the Flying Eagle Fortress. The purpose is to keep her alive while she's still pregnant with the ghost infant. However, she'll immediately die once the ghost infant breaks out from her heart. Moreover, her soul most likely won't enjoy peace after she dies due to the great sins that she's committed. She's living a life worse than death right now, yet she'll suffer a death worse than life in the future. How utterly tragic. Chen Ping'an furrowed his brows. According to the records of a few Taoist texts in my clan's scripture library, these kinds of filthy beings will possess a cultivation base at the 6th tier immediately after they're born. They're incredibly difficult to deal with. Lu Tai continued slowly. They can disperse and gather at will, and it's very hard to destroy them unless one kills them in a single blow. They like to feed on the internal organs of living people, and if they aren't restricted, they can massacre several cities in less than 100 years, claiming hundreds of thousands of victims in the process. This will allow them to easily reach the nascent tier. Ghost infants are already difficult to kill to begin with, so just how difficult will it be to kill an Earth immortal ghost infant? One doesn't need to dream about killing them if one doesn't have a team of at least 3 Earth immortals. If a nascent tier cultivator dares to go by themselves, they'll most probably become nothing more than a snack for the ghost infant. Lu Tai chuckled coldly and remarked, this kind of plot is nothing much in Middle-earth Divine Continent. However, such a plot and such investment can be viewed as very significant in Parasol Leaf Continent. Lu Tai stopped speaking after this, gently rocking the bamboo fan in his hand and sending waves of refreshing breeze into the surroundings. Chen Ping'an remained silent for a moment before saying in a soft voice, I can continue drawing the talisman now. Lu Tai glanced at the young boy beside him and smiled. Chen Ping'an wiped the sweat from his forehead and was just about to put the yin energy guidance talisman away. What are you doing? Lu Tai asked with a baffled expression. The quality of the talisman paper isn't high, so I was only using it for practice. Chen Ping'an replied. Lu Tai snatched the talisman from Chen Ping'an's hand and snapped, Are you stupid? This talisman is already more than enough for this bunch of little children. If the quality is any better, then they might develop a sense of greed and choose to remain as wandering ghosts in this limbo between yin and yang. That will turn a good thing into a bad thing. Chen Ping'an nodded and handed the wind and snow all to Lu Tai. Before retrieving any talisman paper, he asked, Your Netherworld Fairy Talisman is completely different from my yin energy guidance talisman. After all, it's shattering the barrier between yin and yang, rather than simply providing guidance. That being the case, will it be more effective the higher grade the talisman paper is? Lu Tai wanted to say something, but he ultimately kept his mouth shut. Chen Ping'an already knew the answer, so he directly retrieved a piece of golden talisman paper from his sleeve. Lu Tai didn't accept it straight away and he instead asked, Is it worth it? Chen Ping'an nodded in response. Lu Tai shook his head and said, I think it isn't worth it. Chen Ping'an turned around to look at the 2 rows of children squatting in front of the wall before turning back to Lu Tai with a smile and saying with a firm expression, Just take this talisman paper and use it. However, make sure you don't stuff up. Lu Tai sighed and closed his eyes for a brief moment before solemnly steadying his breathing and focusing his mind. Only then did he grip the wind and snow all, and start to draw the Netherworld Fairy Talisman on the golden talisman paper. This talisman was unique to the Lu clan from Middle-earth Divine Continent's naturalist sect. and the symbols on the talisman depicted an old man holding a bamboo pole and steering a lone boat. There was also a line of ancient seal script characters on each side of the talisman. Qian Ping'an trusted Lu Tai's ability to draw talismans, so he turned around to look at the little children squatting in front of the wall. Once upon a time, a young boy had heard the words "wasn't worth it" in the Yang family's medicine shop. Gazing at the children, it was as if Qian Ping'an were gazing at dozens of his own reflections, all of them waiting for an answer. A moment later, Lu Tai smiled and announced, "Mission accomplished." Lu Tai returned the wind and snow all to Qian Ping'an. Afterward, the two of them stood up and Qian Ping'an funneled a wisp of pure true qi into the Yin energy guidance talisman in his hand. A spiritual glow flowed over the talisman, soft and completely different in feel from the Yang energy illumination talisman. Sure enough, the children squatting at the foot of the wall dazedly raised their heads and looked at the talisman in Qian Ping'an's hand after it was activated. They were filled with emotions of joy and nostalgia. Lu Tai tossed the golden netherworld fairy talisman toward the wall of skeletons at the end of the alley. The talisman stuck to the wall, after which golden lines appeared on each of the four sides of the talisman paper. Meanwhile, the middle of the talisman paper started to disappear as the golden lines continued to expand outward. In the end, the golden talisman transformed into a large golden door frame. Lu Tai told Qian Ping'an to slowly walk toward the large door with the Yin energy guidance talisman in his hand. The Yin entity children all stood up and followed Qian Ping'an's guidance, walking toward the end of the alley together. Lu Tai sat down on the steps outside the courtyard door, resting his cheek in one hand as he looked at Qian Ping'an's back. Qian Ping'an followed Lu Tai's instructions and gently placed the Yin energy guidance talisman inside the large golden door. It was as if the talisman came to a hovering stop on the top of the door frame. Dozens of Yin entity children walked inside, some of them skipping and some of them swaying. Some of the older children were also holding the hands of the younger children. One by one, all of them eventually entered the large golden door. However, they suddenly squeezed their heads near the door and started to smile at the young boy in white standing on the other side of the door. Even though they were Yin entities, their smiles were truly innocent and dazzling at this moment. Lu Tai couldn't see Qian Ping'an's expression. Dressed in an azure robe for men, her real name was actually Lu Tai. Tai as in raise up. It was as if she were sulkily opposing her old ancestor, Lu Qian, on purpose. Right now, she could only see Qian Ping'an waving and bidding farewell to those little children. Inside the main building of the Flying Eagle Fortress, dozens of pillar members of the Huan clan stood frozen with dark and ashen expressions. To Fortress Lord Huan Yang's absolute disbelief, the main culprit behind everything was actually the esteemed immortal from Peace and Tranquility Mountain, whom his good friend had spent an exorbitant amount of money to invite over. There were 4 braziers in the large hall, one in each corner, and the pine and cypress branches inside them had already burned up long ago. Some time before this, the esteemed immortal had claimed that this main building was a critical geographic location that those demons and ghosts had coveted for a long time. Thus, it was necessary to gather everyone in the main building to perform a so-called hall-burning ritual. He needed to place unique talismans from Peace and Tranquility Mountain around the hall, such that he could create a formation to dispel the filth. That way, those sinister and demonic cultivators with ulterior motives would no longer have any opportunity to infiltrate and take over this building. The esteemed immortal had also claimed that he would only leave by himself to slay the demons and carry out justice once he guaranteed the safety of the main building. The Flying Eagle Fortress naturally hadn't had any complaints. The overbearing dark clouds above the fortress were stifling and vomit-inducing, making it clear that they were up against genuine demonic cultivators. As crude people from the cultivation world, those in the Flying Eagle Fortress naturally saw it as their duty to fight for the survival of their clan and fortress, even if their opponents were powerful demonic cultivators from Agarwood Nation. They would fight even if it meant death. However, asking them to fight against ghosts and Yin entities? Just thinking about this made their skin crawl. They couldn't help but feel a sense of apprehension. In fact, even their Yang energy became slightly weaker when they thought about this. Fortress Lord Huan Yang hadn't put his full trust in this esteemed immortal from Peace and Tranquility Mountain in the beginning. Huan Yang hadn't dared to be careless even though this immortal possessed the demeanor of a transcendent being as if he were an otherworldly being. And even though his good friend was the one who had introduced this immortal, this kind of caution was necessary for influential, powerful clans in the cultivation world. Thanks to some coincidental fated opportunities, Administrator Hiya had a rough grasp of Dao power, though he couldn't be regarded as skilled in the area. Even so, he was an experienced and knowledgeable member of the cultivation world, what with how he had traveled all over the place with the old fortress lord. Using this experience and knowledge, Administrator Hiya had confirmed that the esteemed immortal was indeed using proper and righteous immortal techniques. The Flying Eagle Fortress was facing an imminent disaster with nowhere to run, but they had finally regained some composure and confidence after hearing Administrator Hiya's analysis. And thus, just an hour ago, the esteemed immortal had held a fly whisk in one hand and a calligraphy brush in his other hand as he had rolled up his sleeve and drew numerous talismans on the large wooden pillars in the large hall. The talismans flowed like water and appeared especially pleasant to the eyes. In fact, Administrator Hiya, also the acting teacher in the Flying Eagle Fortress, had actively accompanied the esteemed immortal and held the dish of vibrant red ink for him. Now, however, the old administrator was slumped in a chair, so enraged that his reddened eyes were almost about to pop out from their sockets. He glared at the man in white standing between Fortress Lord Huanyang and the Fortress Lord's wife, and he felt a strong urge to devour this person's flesh and drink his blood. Administrator Hiya was an old man who already cared little about worldly matters. He didn't have children either, so each extra day that he lived was essentially a blessing from the heavens. Did he need to fear death? However, Hiya couldn't fathom what face he would have to stand in front of the ancestors of the Huan clan after his death. Those with the right to sit in this large hall were mostly elderly members of the Flying Eagle Fortress's Huan clan. Due to their old age and the intense battle in that small alley all those years ago, a large majority of them were experiencing lingering issues as a result of the severe wounds that they had suffered back then. Their vital energy was low, so their faces all became dark and sickly after they inhaled the smoke from the burning pine and cypress. Their bodies were convulsing, and it was possible that they would die without the man in white needing to do anything else. Meanwhile, the youth standing behind their elders were mostly novices when it came to martial arts, so most of them collapsed to the floor after inhaling the smoke from the branches. Those with better martial arts cultivation were still able to sit cross-legged and channel their chi, trying their best to remain conscious and clear-headed. Still holding the snow-white fly whisk in his hand, the tall and sturdy immortal in white gently placed a hand on Fortress Lord Huanyang's shoulder and chuckled. "There's no need to blame yourself, Fortress Lord Huan. You don't need to feel guilty about inviting a wolf into the house. After all, I'm only using such schemes on the Flying Eagle Fortress because I want to save myself some strength. Even if we genuinely fight each other, you gallant people from the cultivation world will still face near certain death. I carefully planned everything out for several decades, and this is a case of someone with intricate plans catching their target completely off guard. Not only that, this is also a case of someone from the mountains targeting someone from outside the mountains. With so many things stacked against you people, how can you people not die?" Fortress Lord Huanyang's wife was trembling in fear. Of everyone in the large hall, only her expression remained normal, and this was likely because she hadn't been affected by the poisonous smoke from the pine and cypress branches. However, she was already scared out of her wits. After all, she was merely someone who was born and had grown up in the Flying Eagle Fortress. She preferred quiet over adventure, and she had never ventured more than 50 kilometers from the fortress. Indeed, she had only occasionally participated in the spring and autumn trips. That being the case, how could she possibly remain composed in the face of such terrifying calamity? The tall immortal in white lifted his hand from Huanyang's shoulder and turned the woman's face toward him in a gentle and adoring manner. However, his eyes weren't filled with the lust of a man coveting a beautiful woman, and they were instead filled with the satisfaction of a craftsman examining the proudest piece of work in their life. He reluctantly retracted his hand and said with a smile, "Fortunately, that mysterious fight nearby didn't affect our Flying Eagle Fortress. Otherwise, we would have lost everything if our plans were uncovered by some observant person. Truth be told, you people could have enjoyed your peaceful life for another half a year according to our original plans. However, my master was genuinely afraid that those fighting cultivators would somehow draw the attention of Planchette Writing Sect. What should we do at that time?" Thus, I immediately hurried over here after receiving a secret letter from my master. No one in the large hall had the ability to speak, and this made the esteemed immortal in white feel a little bored. It was ultimately a small blemish that no one present could praise him for his greatness. He looked around the large hall and sneered. Are you people still holding on to the hope that the old Taoist priest and the young Taoist priest can save you? I encourage you to give up. That old Taoist priest is a measly 5th-tier itinerant cultivator, so it would be his great fortune if a single smack from me doesn't manage to kill him. I'm only leaving them be because the small amount of vital energy and spiritual energy provided by that master and disciple can add icing to the cake. The tall immortal in white felt slightly regretful as he said this. He wouldn't have poured so much secret medicine on the pine and cypress branches if he had known about this earlier. The hall was full of mutes, with not a single person able to raise their voice and abuse him, let alone fall to their knees and kowtow while begging for their life. This was truly very boring. Since the conclusion was already foregone, and seizing the opportunity while his master hadn't acted yet, the tall immortal in white wanted to do something to entertain himself. He looked around the hall, and his gaze eventually settled on a woman channeling her chi to resist the effects of the secret medicine. He hadn't noticed before, but this slender and delicate-looking woman was actually a 4th-tier martial artist who had been hiding her true powers. She must have worked extremely hard to reach such a cultivation base. He slowly walked over before squatting down and grabbing her chin. There was an intense and resolute look in the woman's eyes. The tall immortal in white smiled faintly and retrieved a dazzling and exquisite porcelain bottle from his sleeve. He then turned around and caught sight of a young boy whose appearance was very similar to that of the woman. He was collapsed on the ground and convulsing, with his eyes rolled back and froth pouring from his mouth. It was clear that he was approaching death. The eyes of the tall immortal in white lit up. This was fairly interesting. This young man surprisingly possessed some cultivation aptitude, perhaps enough to make him a valued direct disciple in a third-rate force. Since the tall immortal in white had nothing better to do right now, he decided that he would give this young boy some help. However, it would ultimately depend on the young boy's own skill and fortune whether he could survive and become an external disciple of his master. Before this, however, the young boy could enjoy the body of a beautiful woman regardless of whether he lived or died in the end. As for the other people in the large hall, they could feast on this with their eyes. The tall immortal in white who was disguising himself as an immortal from Peace and Tranquility Mountain extended a finger and placed it on the young boy's glabella. With a casual bend of his finger, he then extracted a wisp of pungent green smoke and condensed it into a tiny ball. He lightly snapped his fingers afterward, causing the tiny ball of smoke to dissipate in the hall. The handsome young boy immediately came to his senses and was just about to say something. However, the tall immortal in white immediately slammed a vermilion alchemical pill into his mouth. He tossed the young boy into the middle of the hall before flicking his fly whisk and shattering the breath of pure true chi that the woman was trying her best to maintain and resist the poisonous smoke with. After doing this, he summoned clouds and mists to carry her over to the young boy. The tall immortal in white smiled with squinted eyes and said, "Please enjoy the show, everyone." The face of the young boy flushed red as he curled up and trembled uncontrollably. However, his eyes immediately became fervent when he saw the woman, and he started to slowly crawl toward her. Tsk, sinister and heretical cultivators like us are unable to compare to those powerful and stable forces in sections. Not only do we have to adopt heretical methods that conflict with the etiquette of the world when we cultivate, but the most detestable thing is that our ultimate potential will still be limited even after we do this. Even reaching the barrier to the golden core tier is nothing more than an unattainable dream for us. The tall immortal in white appeared slightly infuriated as he said this. However, he immediately smiled and said to the young boy, "Even so, this is no reason to underestimate the Sea Observation tier and the Dragon Gate tier. Young boy, your mind is relaxed after eating my boundlessly mystical Nank pill, and this is actually a rare state similar to that of the Wing Formation tier. However, one of your 7 emotions and 6 desires will be infinitely magnified because of this. This is also an untaught secret of my lineage. As for which emotion or desire is magnified, this depends on which type of Nank pill one ingests. The one I fed you is the most expensive type, so make sure not to waste it. You can enjoy yourself to the fullest, and you'll be able to survive as long as you can maintain a shred of clarity the entire time. If you succeed, I'll take you in as my disciple and guarantee you a smooth path early on in your cultivation journey. In fact, you'll even have a chance to reach the middle 5 tiers. The woman was extremely alarmed, yet she couldn't move her body at all. A hint of terror and despair finally appeared on her face. The tall immortal in white continued to encourage the young boy, saying, "There's nothing to worry about. Everyone in the hall will die, so you don't need to fear anything. The heavenly Tao is emotionless, so how can there exist notions of good and evil when it comes to cultivation?" His heart suddenly jolted at this moment, and he immediately raised his head and gripped his fly whisk as if he were facing a powerful enemy. Someone was lazily yawning as they sat on a beam overhead. They looked down at the demonic cultivator, and they retrieved a bamboo folding fan from their sleeve, rocking it gently as they said, "Just how boring are you? Do you genuinely enjoy talking to yourself so much?" This person was none other than Lu Tai. The tall immortal in white narrowed his eyes and asked, "Friend, are you and the young boy with the sword on his back here to enjoy the show? Or are you here to interfere with my plans? Or perhaps the two of you were the ones involved in the fight in the mountains near the Flying Eagle Fortress before?" Lu Tai glanced at the lustful young boy crawling along the floor and clicked his tongue in wonder, saying with a disdainful expression, "Do you feel like everything can be blamed on that alchemical pill? Then allow me to tell you the truth. Right now, at least 30 to 40% of your lust originates from your own heart. It's no wonder that you were chosen by this person. This is because you're also not a good person to begin with." The young boy's hand was almost about to touch the woman's knees, yet he immediately started to struggle at this moment, both mentally and physically. Blood started to trickle from all of the orifices on his face, caking his appearance in black blood. The young boy started to roll around the floor in pain. The tall immortal in white was unfazed, but he felt like it was a slight pity that the alchemical pill had gone to waste. The young boy's fragile Tao heart had crumbled after the young man sitting on the beam had revealed the truth of the matter. If no one had exposed the young boy's true feelings, then he could have continued down this heretical path and stuck to it until the end. In fact, this was a fairly good option for him, and he might have genuinely become an in-house disciple of the tall immortal in white. At that time, he would be able to set foot on the path of cultivation. There was apathy on Lu Tai's face as he held 2 fingers together and made a swiping motion from top to bottom. Needle tip, his bonded flying sword, immediately materialized in midair and slashed down at the young boy who was suffering unspeakable agony. The woman spat a mouthful of blood and shouted at Lu Tai, "Don't!" Needle tip ground to a sudden halt just 1 inch from the young boy's neck. Lu Tai looked toward the tearful woman and said, "It will be better for him if he dies here. If he leaves here alive, then he'll either kill you one day before falling to demonic ways, or he'll eventually be stifled to death by the condemnation from others in the months and years to come." However, the woman simply shook her head and repeatedly murmured, "Please don't kill him, esteemed immortal, I'm begging you." Still holding his fly whisk, the tall immortal in white chuckled and asked, "I'm very curious, how did you sneak into my formation without making a sound?" Lu Tai held his fan with one hand and propped himself up on the beam with his other as he smiled and replied, "In terms of formations, I don't think anyone in the world is as capable as my clan. Say, don't you find this infuriating?" The tall immortal in white roared with laughter. However, his laughter suddenly cut off, and his figure immediately started to twist and turn as he leaped around the hall. At the same time, his snow-white fly whisk with the characters "Extinguishing Worries" inscribed on it also unleashed the howls and rumbles of wind and thunder. Each time he flicked his fly whisk, a strand of hair originating from some type of spirit beast from the mountains would break free from the fly whisk and viciously shoot toward Lu Tai. While flying through the air, the strands of hair would transform into winged white snakes that were as thick as an arm and as quick as lightning. Their bodies also radiated with a chilling cold. Lu Tai paid no heed to the dozens of white snakes as he closed his bamboo fan with a crack. Using it as a calligraphy brush, he started to draw talismans on the beams, with ancient-looking silver characters and symbols continually releasing from the tip of his fan. As if they were alive, the characters and symbols then started to flow through the beams, columns and floor, infiltrating and eventually covering all of the original red ink. He was taking over this hall. Meanwhile, The white snakes formed from the strands of hair from the fly whisk automatically disintegrated into dust when they arrived within 6 meters of Lu Tai. The tall immortal in white was completely unable to discern what kind of secret technique this was. This was the most terrifying thing. However, something even more terrifying than this quickly took place. The young man in azure who looked even more beautiful than a woman smiled faintly as he revealed a secret, saying, "I set up a small formation in the surroundings just then, a type that commonly appears in blessed lands. This formation can restrict all immortal techniques channeled by outsiders, while I myself can become the sage of this area. Doesn't this sound impressive?" Emotion surged in the immortal's mind, and he hesitated for a moment before stopping his attacks with his fly whisk. He rested the fly whisk on his arm and said, "Esteemed immortal, not only is your clan's knowledge profound and ancient, but your skills and immortal techniques are also impressive and admirable. My master and I are willing to show our sincerity and offer you gifts as long as you show us mercy. For example, we can give all of the Flying Eagle Fortress treasures to you and your companion. I can even act privately and use some of my own money to ask my master for a high-grade spirit tool to give to you. What do you say, esteemed immortal?" Lu Tai sidestepped the question and asked, "Is your master at the Golden Core tier?" The tall immortal in white nodded and replied with a faint smile, "I'm willing to reveal my master's title to prove my sincerity. He was the one who killed the 2 Dragon Gate tier cultivators from Peace and Tranquility Mountain back then, and his title is—" Lu Tai hurriedly shook his hands and exclaimed, "Hold it right there. Your intentions are far too sinister. Why do you say this, esteemed immortal?" The tall immortal in white asked with an innocent expression. Lu Tai sighed and said, "You, a sea observation tier cultivator, borrowing the might of a measly golden core tier vagrant cultivator from Parasol Leaf Continent won't scare me to death. However, it will make me laugh to death. And you almost succeeded." Lu Tai clutched his stomach and started to roar with laughter. Of course, it was unknown whether the true mastermind was genuinely a golden core tier cultivator or not. A dark expression spread across the face of the tall immortal in white. He had come across a mentally challenged idiot. More importantly, this androgynous person possessed a profound cultivation base that he couldn't see through at all. Lu Tai stopped laughing and even wiped tears from the corners of his eyes. By the looks of it, he had truly been amused by the tall immortal in white. "Apart from you and your master, do you have any other powerful allies involved in nurturing this ghost infant?" The tall immortal in white was stunned. He smiled bitterly and replied, "This is a heinous act, and perhaps those outside the mountains will feel like we're very far away from Planchette Writing Sect, with more than 500 kilometers between us. In our eyes, the eyes of cultivators from the mountains, however, this isn't far at all. That being the case, do you think my master and I alone would dare to set up such a huge scheme? Do you think the two of us are capable enough to control this situation? Oh, so it's simply the case that you and your master want to obtain all of the benefits for yourselves," Lu Tai said in amusement. The tall immortal in white purposely put on a calm and composed expression. However, he was already unleashing a barrage of abuse in his mind. "Don't you find this awkward?" Lu Tai asked with an amused expression. "You can't afford to give me what I want, yet my companion and I, 2 outsiders, are coincidentally able to ruin your carefully executed plan of decades." Killing intent radiated from the tall immortal in white when he heard this. "Are you going to insist on interfering until the end? Are you not afraid of bringing death to everyone including yourself?" Fury boiled in the immortal's chest as he continued. "Indeed, it's just like you guessed. My master and I are unable to give you and your companion enough benefits. However, how will it benefit you to interfere with our plans in the first place? My master nurtured and raised the ghost infant using a unique secret technique that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Moreover, the ghost infant has already recognized us as his master. Taking 10,000 steps back, can you keep the ghost infant alive even if you manage to snatch it from us?" Lu Tai flipped his bamboo fan around and used its handle to gently tap the beam he was sitting on. He appeared extremely calm and carefree as he replied, "Am I not allowed to do something good for the sake of righteousness?" The tall immortal in white almost exploded in fury, with his lips trembling uncontrollably. The woman pregnant with the ghost infant was present in the hall right now, and any minor injury that she suffered would affect the future growth of the ghost infant and thus detrimentally affect his master's subsequent plan of 100 years. If it weren't for this and all of his other considerations, the tall immortal in white truly wanted to go all out and fight this androgynous person to the death. The face of the tall immortal in white became extremely dark. In fact, his face almost became as dark as those of the poisoned members of the Flying Eagle Fortress. Lu Tai suddenly became bored of this conversation, so he closed his folding fan and retrieved numerous snow-white alchemical pills from his sleeve before scattering them into the 4 braziers in the corners of the hall. It wasn't that the immortal with the fly whisk didn't want to stop Lu Tai, but the young man's shockingly large flying sword materialized in the air once again, plummeting down again and again, reappearing in midair after it sunk into the floor. It was very difficult for him to dodge these attacks. Afterward, the true killing strike from Lu Tai disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared. The tall immortal in white was almost struck. He roared in fury, and it wasn't long before only the handle of his fly whisk with the characters, "Extinguishing Worries," remained. Meanwhile, the countless strands of snow-white hair transformed into winged white snakes that rapidly flew around with their wings beating in an ear-piercing manner. They were densely packed together as they shielded the tall immortal in white. The immortal reached up and touched his face where a bone-deep gash had newly appeared. His head would have been pierced by the sword if he hadn't turned it to the side quickly enough, and he was also skilled in formations. Moreover, he had shamelessly claimed that no one in the world could rival his clan when it came to formations. "You've run into this trap yourself, you can't blame anyone else," Lu Tai sneered. The silver talismanic symbols of the columns shone with brilliance before linking together to form a net around the large hall. The threads connecting this net together were none other than the characters and symbols hovering in midair. Apart from the immortal who had accidentally trapped himself in this hall, Lu Tai's 2 bonded flying swords, Needle Tip and Wheat On, were also present inside this net. Lu Tai gracefully hovered down from the beam, no longer caring about that cage as he walked toward the deathly pale wife of the fortress lord. Her eyes were expressionless, and her body was drenched in sweat. There was also a faint pungence coming from her chair. When he walked past the slender woman in the middle of the hall, the woman who had secretly reached the 4th tier of martial arts had already regained her mobility and pulled the dazed and haggard young boy into her embrace. After tossing the alchemical pills into the braziers just then, the pills had disintegrated and sent snow-white powder wafting through the hall. The members of the Flying Eagle Fortress Huan clan slowly recovered after inhaling this powder, with a healthy shade of redness gradually returning to their faces. However, even though they were uninjured, their souls had been exhausted to such a state that their lifespans would inevitably be affected and cut short. The slender woman suddenly turned around and questioned Lu Tai in a stern voice, exclaiming, "Why did you say those things just then? You're also one of the main culprits." Lu Tai turned around and glanced at her before smiling faintly and asking, "Then maybe I should dispose of the 2 of you right here and now? Perhaps that will clean everything up and get rid of all worries." The slender woman holding the young boy in her arms hurriedly lowered her head, not daring to look at Lu Tai anymore. Lu Tai walked over and stood in front of the fortress lord's wife with his hands clasped behind his back. Bending down to observe her condition, he said, "Your vital energy is almost completely depleted. In other words, death is already an inevitability for you. You only have 2 choices in front of you right now: to die an honorable death, or to be exterminated as vermin." In Lu Tai's eyes, her seemingly beautiful face was already shattered and filled with many imperfections. Wisps of black air that reeked of death exuded from her body, and her eyes, which still seemed lively and beautiful in the eyes of mortals, were already pitch black. The woman who had enjoyed a life of peace and comfort for many years was unreactive, and at a complete loss. Lu Tai smiled and continued, "Stop playing dumb. I know that your mind and soul have already returned. Since you're experiencing a period of terminal lucidity, and still have the energy to make your own choice, I'm willing to respect your decision and will. However, you only have 15 minutes before you lose control of your body again. When that time comes, I won't afford you such patience and politeness anymore." Huan Yang was just about to stand up and speak, yet Lu Tai immediately flicked his sleeve and sealed all of the fortress lord's 5 senses. Huan Yang was forced to sit there like an obedient puppet whose eyes were filled with pain and pleading. The fortress lord's wife slowly looked up and murmured, Can I not die? Lu Tai sighed, unsure of how to respond. After remaining silent for a long time, Lu Tai leaned on the woman's chair and turned around to face the door of the hall. Then live for a while longer, he said in a gentle voice. Outside the main building of the Flying Eagle Fortress, the disheveled old man helplessly watched on as those roosters on a diet of glutinous rice and spring water died one after another. Huan Chong and Huan Shu were coincidentally tagging along with Taoist priest Huang Shang and Tao Xiang today, and this was because the two siblings were unwilling to hide in the safety of the main building. They were unwilling to hide under the protection of the esteemed immortal from Peace and Tranquility Mountain. Since the old Taoist priest was still going around the fortress, the two siblings decided that they wanted to do something to help as well. The old Taoist priest glanced at the sea of dark clouds that was continually bearing down. He gritted his teeth and was left with no option but to summon his trump card. He retrieved 2 large white bowls, one in each hand, and said to the siblings, I need to borrow 2 to 3 ounces of blood from the 2 of you in order to activate the 2 stone lions outside the ancestral hall of your Huan clan. These stone lions are prized protective treasures that your grandpa obtained from a powerful person many years ago. And they're the true trump cards of the Flying Eagle Fortress. The old Taoist priest raised his hands and said in a solemn voice, Make haste. We still need to hurry to the ancestral hall after this. There's no time to waste. Huan Chong and Huan Shu exchanged a glance before slicing open their palms without any hesitation, allowing their blood to flow into the large white bowls in the old Taoist priest's hands. The old Taoist priest then caused the 2 bowls to vanish with a flick of his wrists before warning, Our path might be blocked by ghosts and entities, so I won't necessarily be able to protect the 4 of you. You need to look after yourselves. In fact, you might even need to help clear the path for me. If you die, there won't be anyone to collect your corpse for you. So now's your chance to think things through and pull out if you want. The 2 siblings and the 2 good friends nodded in unison, signaling that they wanted to continue. Let's go, the old Taoist priest shouted softly. Just as he had anticipated, the ghosts and entities hiding all over the Flying Eagle Fortress finally rushed out from their hiding spots and charged at them, as if they had already seen through their plans. A young boy in white suddenly appeared above some roof, standing on the apex as he gazed into the distance. The direction he was gazing in was none other than the one where the old Taoist priest and the 4 youths were jumping over roofs and sprinting toward the ancestral hall. Chen Ping'an pinched a talisman with each hand before gently letting go of them and silently calling, First 15th. The 2 streaks of sword light each carried a talisman with them as they furiously shot toward the Huan clan's ancestral hall, quickly pinning the treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talismans on the 2 pillars outside the building. 2 bursts of dazzling golden light instantly exploded from the pillars. Afterward, 2 streaks of sword light returned to Chen Ping'an's side before once again leaving with a yellow paper talisman each. These talismans were pinned on the roofs of 2 buildings not far in front of the old Taoist priest and the 4 youths. Finally, 1st and 15th carried another 2 demon-suppressing talismans with them to help the disheveled old Taoist priest clear a path. After using all of his demon-suppressing talismans, Chen Ping'an no longer paid any attention to the situation over at the Huan clan's ancestral hall. Each person needed to take responsibility for their own life and death when traveling through the cultivation world to subdue demons and eliminate fiends. This was the case when doing evil, and this was also the case when doing good. The dark clouds overhead were almost about to crush down on the fortress. It was as if the sky had fallen so low that one could reach up and touch it with their hands. It was as if a few shouts from the streets and markets could astonish the immortals in the heavens. Chen Ping'an looked up at the sky. The members of the cultivation world in the Flying Eagle Fortress couldn't see scenes behind the dark clouds. But he could. There was an old man with a tall hat and of unknown power sitting cross-legged on a red straw mat. He was currently reciting something, and he controlled the sea of dark clouds that was just large enough to cover the fortress to slowly descend toward the earth. The time had arrived, so the old man was going to massacre the Flying Eagle Fortress and absorb all of the essence of blood and flesh. He was going to feed that ghost infant that was soon going to be born. With his footsteps light and nimble, Chen Ping'an started to leap across the rooftops at a rapid speed, so quick that his white robe made him appear like a streak of snow-white light. In the end, he arrived at the Flying Eagle Fortress martial arts training ground, which was completely deserted except for him. Chun Ping'an lightly stomped his foot and took a deep breath. He then bent his knees slightly and slowly adopted a fist stance that exuded a boundless and ancient aura. This was the rain evaporation technique. At this moment, golden sweet wine, his Dao robe concealed by an illusion technique, revealed its true appearance. Flood dragons swam across his long golden robe. Chun Ping'an closed his eyes and rapidly channeled his breath of pure true qi using the 18 stops technique, causing his qi to appear like a churning river roaring toward the sea. After a while, Chun Ping'an suddenly opened his eyes and forcefully stomped his foot. Not only did the martial arts training ground shudder violently, causing countless weapons to fall from the wooden racks, but plumes of dust also rose in several nearby streets. Chun Ping'an threw a punch at the sky. He then threw punch after punch. He had assumed the fist stance of the rain evaporation technique, yet he was unleashing the fist intent of the deity drumming technique. Cui Chan's grandfather, the old man in the bamboo building, had never taught Chun Ping'an such kind of fist technique before. Chun Ping'an threw punch after punch, also stomping his foot again and again to increase his power. The earth quaked and rumbled as if something were tossing and turning underground. The old man in the bamboo building had said that upon comprehending the rain evaporation technique and unleashing it for the first time, his punch had forced the rain to retreat more than 300 meters into the sky, not daring to fall on the land anymore. Chun Ping'an wasn't thinking about too many things at this moment, and he simply wanted to emulate the old man's feat from before. Using his fists, he wanted to tell the churning dark clouds overhead to piss off back into the sky. Unbeknownst to the young boy, he had reached a state where there was no one in front. Before Chun Ping'an had thrown his first punch, the old man above the dark clouds was wearing a 5 mountains hat decorated with the true appearances of the 5 mountains. The hat was overflowing with dazzling colors, and one could vaguely hear the sound of rustling pine trees, calling cranes and flowing spring water. Like a general commanding an army of tens of thousands of troops and horses, the old man confidently commanded the sea of clouds to descend upon the small and insignificant fortress. He suddenly squinted his eyes and looked toward the martial arts training ground in the Flying Eagle Fortress, and what he saw caused him to involuntarily chuckle. That young and naive child actually dared to challenge him like an ant challenging a towering tree? How utterly impudent! He and his disciple had meticulously plotted for almost 40 years to nurture that ghost infant in the heart of the fortress lord's wife, so they were hell-bent on obtaining it no matter what. They had experienced countless difficulties and challenges, and they had also taken many huge gambles. At the same time, they had also experienced many unexplainably mystical coincidences and fated opportunities. However, all of these things were unknown to outsiders. The original purpose for building this Flying Eagle Fortress, hidden away in the mountain forests, had most likely ended up buried in the soil along with the first fortress lord. However, the old man above the dark clouds was keenly aware of the original purpose. Back then, 2 earth immortals from Planchette Writing Sect and Peace and Tranquility Mountain, the 2 most powerful immortal forces in the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent, had gotten into a conflict with each other and ended up engaging in a huge fight. However, the Golden Courtier Cultivator from Planchette Writing Sect hadn't imagined that the Earth Immortal whom he had provoked was actually a paramount nascent tier cultivator from Peace and Tranquility Mountain. The latter knew that his lifespan was nearing an end and he had no hope of breaking through to the next tier. So he had left the mountains and started to travel around the world after arranging his funeral affairs with his descendants. The Golden Courtier Cultivator had tried to flee, yet he had ultimately been stopped by the nascent tier cultivator in the location that was the Flying Eagle Fortress today. Being in the right, the nascent tier cultivator had been unwilling to relent, not caring about the influence of Planchette Writing Sect at all. He had been hellbent on killing the Golden Courtier Cultivator from Planchette Writing Sect. Understanding that he had nowhere else to flee, the Golden Courtier Cultivator had resolved to drag his opponent to death alongside him. With this in mind, he had channeled a prohibited technique of Planchette Writing Sect. This was because he had already reached his limit and was unable to channel the proper deity summoning technique of his sect. Indeed, there had been little hope for him to summon a powerful deity. Thus, the Golden Courtier Cultivator had sacrificed all of his blood essence to summon a primordial demonic, being recorded in the secret texts of Planchette Writing Sect. The demonic being had measured over 30 meters in height, with its dark and murderous aura so thick that it was almost tangible. It was as if its aura had been a suit of heavy black armor. In reality, the Golden Core Tier Cultivator had already ceased breathing after summoning this demonic being. His completely hollowed body had transformed into ashes and dissipated into heaven and earth. With his opponent dead, the nascent Tier Cultivator had indeed possessed the opportunity to retreat. However, he had ultimately chosen to fight to the death with that primordial demonic being. He had summoned all of his immortal treasures, and he had unleashed his mystical abilities at the demonic being, as if he were unleashing a torrential downpour. The old cultivator had fought until his body was riddled with gaping wounds and his soul was wavering in exertion, and he had fought until his golden core was shattered and his Een soul which had left his acupoint to fight alongside him was killed. Even so, the nascent Tier Cultivator had still roared that this was a satisfying battle. In the end, he had perished together with the primordial demonic being that had just arrived in the world. The earth-shaking battle had caused the Een energy within a radius of 50 kilometers to gather and condense in a manner that was no inferior to an ancient battlefield that was home to hundreds of thousands of corpses. Even after passing away, the nascent Tier Cultivator from Peace and Tranquility Mountain had still been worried about the detrimental effects of the Een energy, afraid that it would flow into the surroundings and affect the fortune of the mountains and rivers in the nearby 500 kilometers. Because of this, his remnant soul had forcefully lived on and found a young woodsman nearby. The nascent Tier Cultivator had then taught the young man a secret subjugation technique, as well as a combat technique, one that involved the saber and extreme yang energy. Afterward, the remnant soul of the nascent Tier Cultivator had also told the young woodsman to construct a fortress here, and have his descendants live here for generations after generations. That way, his descendants who would also be pure martial artists could rely on their yang energy to suppress the condensed Een energy in this place. At the same time, the formless Een energy here would also act as an optimal whetstone for the Huan clan's descendants when they practiced that saber technique. As a result, these descendants could often achieve twice the results with half the effort. It was thanks to this that the Flying Eagle Fortress had eventually cemented its status as a dominant martial arts force in the cultivation world, one that produced a plethora of prodigies. Including Huan Yang's father, several of the previous fortress lords had liked to travel around the cultivation world after achieving some success in martial arts. On the surface, they were seemingly trying to bring fame and honor to the Flying Eagle Fortress. In reality, however, they were actually traveling to renowned mountains and forces to look for immortals, seeking methods to resolve the Flying Eagle Fortress issue with overly powerful Een energy once and for all. However, the old fortress lord had passed away in a suspicious manner a number of years ago. As a result, Huan Yang, his son who didn't possess outstanding martial arts talent, had stepped up to the position of fortress lord in a very hasty manner. Shortly afterward, demonic cultivators from Agarwood Nation had also formed an alliance to attack the Flying Eagle Fortress together. Due to all of these reasons, the history between that nascent Tier Cultivator and the founding ancestor of the Flying Eagle Fortress, as well as his fated immortal opportunities, had ended up lost. Many of the relationships that the ancestors of the Huan clan had worked extremely hard to forge had also petered out as a result. For example, Fortress Lord Huan Yang was completely unaware of the relationship between his father and the old Taoist priest, Huang Shang's master. Because of this, he had instead sought help from his friend in the capital. Not only that, but everyone in the Flying Eagle Fortress was oblivious to the powers of the two stone lions outside the Huan clan's ancestral hall as well. It was a combination of all these things that led to the disastrous events of today. The old man wearing a tall hat and sitting above the dark clouds was a notorious demonic cultivator from the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent. He had once been a powerful and respected Golden Core Tier cultivator, and he had personally viewed his combat power as strong enough to rival fellow Golden Core Tier cultivators from Planchette Riding Sect in Peace and Tranquility Mountain even though he was only a vagrant cultivator. However, he had quickly invited a fast and furious response from Peace and Tranquility Mountain, after killing 2 Dragon Gate Tier cultivators from the force. A young Golden Core Tier cultivator from Peace and Tranquility Mountain had left the mountains by themselves and hunted him for more than 5,000 kilometers, completely depleting the old man of his wealth. In fact, even his pocket treasure had ended up shattering. In the end, The old man had been forced to sacrifice half of his body and cultivation base to trick the young cultivator who was like a deity from the heavenly court. Only then did he manage to flee with his life. The old man felt intense resentment toward the young cultivator in Peace and Tranquility Mountain, so he was always thinking about how to exact revenge. And thus, a meticulous plan that involved the Flying Eagle Fortress and stretched for several decades was born. After falling to the Dragon Gate tier, the old man had secretly shattered the bridge of immortality of the fortress lord's wife when she was still young, stripping her of the ability to cultivate. However, he had left her bridge of immortality intact even though it was shattered and riddled with hundreds upon thousands of cracks. Only the section of the bridge near her heart was completely unscathed. This caused the fortress lord's wife to become something like a porcelain jar that continued to absorb energy from the earth. Moreover, this energy would all be funneled to the so-called spring origin located at her heart. Finally, the old man had used a secret technique to create the ghost infant in her heart, one that continued to feed on her vitality and energy. Once the old man succeeded here and saw the ghost infant crawl out of that woman's heart, he could venture out and search for some small and remote nations that were far from the gazes of those immortals in the mountains. He was still a Dragon Gate tier cultivator after all, so he could naturally become an imperial preceptor in these nations with ease. Or perhaps he could make some of the officials become his puppets, or he could even control the rulers in secret. Afterward, he could incite battle after battle and feed his ghost infant until it was full. After 100 years, his ghost infant would become a powerful earth immortal that heeded his command. Even though it wouldn't be strong enough to destroy the incredibly powerful and influential Peace and Tranquility Mountain, it would definitely be strong enough to cause heavy losses for them and wound them to the core. When it came to grudges between immortals from the mountains, enduring and planning vengeance for 100 years genuinely couldn't be considered a long time. As for whether these acts of vengeance killed mortals from outside the mountains, some people didn't care about this at all, for example the old man sitting above the dark clouds. However, there were also some people who did care, for example the nascent tier cultivator from Peace and Tranquility Mountain. Even so, such a benevolent and compassionate terrestrial immortal had still failed to advance to the upper 5 tiers. Not only that, but he had also been forced to perish with the primordial demonic being. This was a reflection of the Great Tao's heartless nature. It didn't discriminate based on whether a person was good or bad. In any case, the old man above the dark clouds still found things slightly comical after the young martial artist threw his third punch. If one didn't have the strength to back up their vigorous aura, then one would be nothing more than a hollow building that merely appeared extravagant on the outside. However, the old man was genuinely salivating over the dazzling golden Tao robe on the young boy's body. This was a completely unexpected surprise. This young boy, a novice in the cultivation world, actually possessed such a valuable treasure and didn't understand how to cherish his own life? This was indeed a very impressive treasure. In fact, it might even be a genuine immortal treasure. Perhaps the tides of fortune were finally turning? Perhaps it was his turn to experience riches and power? Perhaps he no longer needed to scurry around like a rat, and perhaps he could return to his former glory earlier than anticipated? As for whether the young boy wearing the golden robe was a disciple of some immortal force, the old man above the dark clouds couldn't care less about this. He had already offended Peace and Tranquility Mountain, so what harm could it do to offend one more force? As the sea of dark clouds descended lower and lower, almost all of the residents in the Flying Eagle Fortress started to feel dizzy and disoriented. Some elders, infants, and women whose bodies were weaker, and whose yang energy wasn't strong enough also started to vomit in their homes. The sound of unceasing crying echoed through the large streets and small alleys, and through the tall buildings and low courtyards. Many young men who practiced martial arts dazedly looked up at the sea of pitch-black clouds bearing down on them, feeling as if they were about to be crushed into smithereens. Some youths with weaker willpower were already devoid of any fight, with their bodies trembling in fear as they gave up on any thought of resistance. Their martial arts future would be severed even if they managed to survive the calamity today. Following the trail of earthquake-like commotion, some people also noticed the spectacular golden light shining through the flying dust and ashes in the direction of the martial arts training ground. One after another, those bursts of fist auras were filled with vigor as they became increasingly large and powerful, growing from the girth of an arm to the width of a bowl and then to the width of a well. The fist auras continued to grow in size, seemingly unstoppable as they soared toward the sky. It was as if someone were unleashing a barrage of relentless attacks at the sea of clouds. Some people couldn't help but think, this person only dares to attack the dark clouds because of his lofty martial arts cultivation base. On the martial arts training ground, Chun Ping'an wasn't standing still as he threw punches at the sky. Instead, he would quickly change his position after throwing each punch, performing the 6-step walking meditation of the mountain shaking guide, and channeling his qi according to the 18 stops technique. Only after doing this would he throw another punch using the fist stance of the rain evaporation technique and the fist intent of the deity drumming technique. After throwing 10 punches, the might of his fists were already far greater than the might of his stomps. The young boy's fist aura blasted toward the sky, carrying with it the howling of wind and the rumbling of thunder. Near the martial arts training ground, the ceramic tiles on the roofs of the houses started to violently explode layer by layer. With Chun Ping'an as the epicenter, the walls of the courtyards and houses in the surroundings also started to crack in a chaotic manner. The bluestone slabs on the martial arts training ground had suffered immense punishment as well, with 10 pits of varying depths now decorating its surface. Even though the first 9 punches had each been more powerful than the last, all of them had simply blasted through the dark clouds and nothing else. However, the 10th punch directly rushed toward the red straw mat that the old man wearing a tall hat was sitting cross-legged on. Even though the old man was already feeling a slight sense of apprehension, marking the young boy as someone whom he definitely needed to kill and moreover someone whom he needed to kill first, he was still relatively unfazed by Chun Ping'an's powerful 10th punch. Instead, he felt a little competitive. The old man chuckled coldly before extending a hand and summoning a large orb of dark green light which suddenly unleashed its radiance. He then turned his palm and pressed down, blocking the path of the fist aura that was tearing through the dark clouds. There was a deafening boom, and the old man's straw mat swayed slightly as the sea of dark clouds beneath him shuddered in a violent manner. The fist aura from the martial arts training ground and the dazzling green light around the old man's palm exploded together, transforming into countless specks of light. The shattered fist aura dissipated into the nearby sea of clouds, causing a smattering of golden shards to seep into the pitch-black clouds that were initially ink-like and radiating with the aura of death. There was the crackling sound of burning as the golden shards attacked the dark clouds. The old man shook his wrist and looked through the gaping hole that had been torn through the dark clouds by that beam of radiant fist aura. He peered down at the martial arts training ground that was only 90 meters away, and he said with a menacing smile, "How impressive! With your young age, you can be considered a martial arts grandmaster of a region in the cultivation world outside the mountains. However, you're unwilling to enjoy your life in the cultivation world, and you insist on standing here and opposing me instead? How naive and impudent." As he spoke, the old man raised a hand and held 2 fingers together, bringing them near his tall hat decorated with the true appearances of the 5 mountains. With a gentle swipe, he retrieved the true intent of some eastern mountain from the ancient past, and sent it hurtling down through the hole in the clouds. The first of the 5 mountains to leave his tall hat was a miniature mountain the size of a thumb. However, it had already grown to a size no smaller than the old man's straw mat when it reached his feet. After sliding through the hole in the clouds, it had already become as large as a table. The old man cackled with wanton laughter and exclaimed in an extremely delighted voice, "I've endured and hidden myself like a turtle for so many years, but the heavens ultimately don't betray those who fight through hardships. It's finally my turn to enjoy good fortunes. If I pulverize the essence of your blood and flesh and feed it to the ghost infant, it's entirely possible that it might shoot to the sea observation tier the instant that it breaks free from that woman's heart." Standing on the martial arts training ground, Chun Ping'an was completely unafraid as he looked at the mountain crashing down from the sky. When staying in the Sun Clan's ancestral residence in Old Dragon City, the might of the golden flood dragon swooping down at him from the clouds hadn't been any weaker than this. However, had he not swung his fists at them all the same? His aura grew to a mighty and majestic level. His fist intent was vigorous and overflowing, and he firmly believed that his fist could shatter all techniques. Chun Ping'an's dazzling golden robe billowed in the air, making the young boy from Clay Vase Alley seem that much like an immortal from the mountains for the first time in his life. Chun Ping'an's 11th punch was incredibly quick, The truly powerful nature of the deity drumming technique's fist intent was the fact that it could stack together as long as one's physique and soul were strong enough to withstand the agonizing pain caused by the qi furiously flowing inside one's body. If one successfully managed to throw punch after punch, then one could genuinely shake mountains and annihilate cities. This wasn't an exaggeration. Chen Ping'an's punch caused the house-sized mountain to retreat a dozen or so meters into the air. Without saying a single word, Chen Ping'an immediately stomped his foot again and threw another punch. The expression on the old man wearing the tall hat became slightly solemn, and he no longer focused on trying to toy with the young boy anymore. Instead, he silently recited a mantra as he held 2 fingers together, making 4 consecutive swiping motions near his hat decorated with the true appearances of the 5 mountains. Even though this would expend a significant amount of his spiritual energy, and cause his tall hat to temporarily lose its powers as well, the old man was determined to go all out and kill this irritating young boy in a single blow. As an itinerant cultivator with no powerful backer and no habit of seeking help from others, this tall hat was the old man's only immortal treasure. He had obtained it from a secret realm, and he had suddenly lashed out to kill his companion when dividing spoils in order to guarantee that this immortal treasure became his. He had killed his good friend who had gone through thick and thin with him. Before dying, his good friend had begged him to take care of his descendants and guarantee that they enjoyed 100 years of mortal glory and riches. The old man had nodded and agreed, yet he had immediately used some technique to silently and completely eliminate the clan of 100 or so people. Even when the old man was chased for 5,000 kilometers by the young golden courtier cultivator from Peace and Tranquility Mountain, his extremely valuable 5 Mountains hat had still remained intact and only suffered some minor damage. Moreover, it had already returned to its peak state after being repaired for 100 years. 2 mountains were stacked together as they crashed down as quickly as lightning. Chen Ping'an's rapid 13th punch only managed to push the eastern mountain, the mountain at the bottom, 3 or so meters into the air. The next mountain quickly crashed down. Would the weight of the mountain gain an advantage? Or would the young boy's fist techniques prove more invincible? The old man's 5 Mountains hat had already lost its luster, no longer echoing with the rustling of pine trees and the calls of cranes. Chen Ping'an's qi and blood were churning, and he was yet to show signs of becoming exhausted. However, he didn't want to be trapped by the 3 plummeting mountains. After all, who knew what other secret techniques the old man had up his sleeves? Seizing the opportunity when the deity drumming technique could rest but not be cut off, Chen Ping'an prepared to retreat from the martial arts training ground and choose a new location for their battle. He would then hurriedly throw the 14th punch. Chen Ping'an had already prepared an inch movement talisman, yet he was astonished to discover that standing in the shadows of the mountains was akin to standing in Lu Tai's so-called land without Tao, one that restricted the immortal techniques of all outsiders. His inch movement talismans had helped him immensely in many past battles, yet they surprisingly remained unresponsive at this moment. Left with no other option, Chen Ping'an could only summon 1st and 15th from his sword-nurturing gourd, and have them shoot into the sea of dark clouds. Meanwhile, Chen Ping'an was forced to throw his 14th punch, causing the plummeting mountain to falter slightly. He then charged forward, attempting to leave the shadows of the mountains. The old man wearing the tall hat roared with laughter and exclaimed, "Trying to flee?" He pressed down with his palm, causing a 4th mountain to crash down. There were now 4 mountains stacked together and rumbling loudly as they crashed down toward Chen Ping'an. Moreover, the martial arts training ground that had now become the foot of the mountains was being suppressed by boundless spiritual energy, causing Chen Ping'an's movements to slow down. The mountains were finally able to suppress the young boy wearing a golden robe and unleashing astonishingly powerful fist techniques. The old man wearing the tall hat was slightly astonished after succeeding, and he remarked, "Since when have pure martial artists been able to summon bonded flying swords as well?" Flowing water often existed together with tall mountains. Upon detecting the presence of the 2 flying swords piercing through the air, the old man plucked 2 rivers from his 5 Mountains hat. One was murky and yellow while one was green and limpid. After materializing, both rivers appeared as slender as a woman's waist. The 2 rivers flowed around the old man's red straw mat, blocking the swift and fierce attacks from the 2 flying swords again and again. Water splashed into the surroundings, causing the two rivers to continually shrink in size. However, the old man wearing the tall hat was still more focused on the martial arts training ground. Right now, the sea of dark clouds was only a measly 60 meters from the ground. The old man's red straw mat was almost about to touch the peak of the fourth mountain, and this caused his vision to be partially obstructed. The old man wearing the tall hat extended a finger and tapped his glabella, silently mouthing the word open at the same time. His eyes instantly became pitch black. Like the clouds and mists of nighttime dissipating, the true appearance of the bright moon then appeared in his eyes, allowing heaven and earth to become clear again. The old man's vision successfully penetrated through the 4 stacked mountains, allowing him to see the figure of the young boy wearing the golden robe. What a sly brat! You're just like a slippery loach. You're still trying to sneak away. Qian Ping'an first lowered his head and bent his back slightly, carrying the mountains on his shoulders as he charged forward. As the mountains continued to descend, Qian Ping'an eventually bent down even further as he sprinted forward. Meanwhile, the power of his golden robe astonished the old man, forcefully winning valuable time for him at this critical moment. It allowed Qian Ping'an to roll forward and avoid the fate of being crushed into minced meat by the 4 stacked mountains, when the mountains were just 4 feet from the surface of the martial arts training ground. The old man wearing the tall hat chuckled coldly in his mind. The demonic forces would always be one step ahead. He had been waiting for this moment when the young boy would mistakenly believe that he had managed to successfully flee. The 5th mountain was yet to crash down, and this was none other than the most venerated central mountain. One could vaguely make out the steepness of this mountain when one gazed upon the projection of its true appearance. That the young boy was able to resist the crushing power of 4 large mountains was already far beyond the old man's expectations. He had initially thought that 3 stacked mountains would be enough to crush the young boy to death. Indeed, the young boy's fist technique that could seemingly stack its might without limit was truly very strange. If he could obtain the secret scripture detailing this fist technique after he killed the young boy, it was entirely possible that it would be no inferior to the golden robe. "Go!" the old man roared. The central mountain crashed down toward the rolling Qian Ping'an. At the same time, the 4 other mountains started to separate, keeping the central mountain as the middle point as they landed in the surroundings and took root. Some crushed the buildings in the martial arts training ground, some knocked down tall walls, some landed in streets beyond the martial arts training ground, and some pulverized private courtyards neighboring the martial arts training ground. The 5 mountains would form a large and natural formation once the 4 mountains took root, and the central mountain solidified its position. As if linked to the mind of the young boy facing imminent death, the 2 flying swords above the sea of dark clouds became increasingly ferocious as they attacked the true intent of the 2 rivers. The old man wearing the tall hat laughed heartily and said, "Oh my, I'm seriously scared of you 2 little things. Very well, then I'll play a game of hide and seek with you. Let's see how the 2 of you will react once you're Masta dis." The old man reached out with both hands and grabbed 2 sheets of dark clouds and mist. He then clapped his hands together, vanishing amid the large expanse of billowing clouds and mist. Trapped by the 5 mountains, Qian Ping'an was already walking on a tightrope between life and death. Even though 1st and 15th were brimming with majestic sword chi, they were still helpless against the old man who had decided to go into hiding. They could only attack and reduce the volume of the pitch-black clouds. Meanwhile, Qian Ping'an had already unleashed the demon-binding chain forged from the 2 whiskers of the elderly golden flood dragon. The demon-binding chain was a dazzling golden color, and it immediately grew in size until it looked like a golden flood dragon lying coiled on the central mountain. It forcefully dragged the mountain a dozen or so meters into the air, preventing it from crashing down and making contact with the ground. This temporarily prevented the 5 mountains from completing their formation as well. However, even though the demon-binding chain continued to shrink, causing shattered rocks to continually fly from the central mountain, the central mountain still maintained its momentum and slowly descended toward the ground. At this moment, the sea of dark clouds was just 30 meters above the ground of the Flying Eagle Fortress. If someone were to stand on the observation deck of the main building and gaze into the distance, it would seem as if they were standing on the peak of a large mountain that towered thousands of meters above the ground. This was a magnificent scene with howling winds and rolling clouds. Inside the main building of the Flying Eagle Fortress, The man holding the fly whisk and restricted from using any immortal techniques was exhausted but still forced to flee for his life as he was chased by Lu Tai's large and small bonded flying swords. The members of the Flying Eagle Fortress Huan clan were able to witness the truly spectacular techniques of an immortal from the mountains. While rejoicing at their fortune of being saved by the handsome young man, the members of the Huan clan couldn't help but feel a slight sense of despair as well. Martial artists from the cultivation world were truly insignificant compared to such profoundly powerful immortals from the mountains. Lu Tai didn't stand there idly and let his two extremely high-grade bonded flying swords, Needle Tip and Weed On, slowly exhaust the Sea Observation Tier Cultivator to death. Instead, he retrieved numerous immortal treasures and tools from his colorful ribbon, many of which he had obtained during his travels. When his bonded flying sword slashed a gap in the cage trapping the man with the fly whisk, Lu Tai would seize the opportunity to launch vicious attacks at his opponent. This was naturally a painful and perilous situation for the Sea Observation Tier Cultivator. The tall immortal in white tried to plead his case first, trying his hardest to persuade Lu Tai to stop such that they could sit down and discuss things in an amicable manner. If Lu Tai were willing to stop, then he was willing to hand over all of his wealth and even allow Lu Tai to put restrictions on his soul. However, upon realizing that Lu Tai wouldn't budge, the tall immortal in white who only had the handle of his fly whisk remaining started to threaten Lu Tai in a menacing manner, claiming that he would destroy Lu Tai's two flying swords when he died. He also promised to wound Lu Tai's soul, making it so that the handsome young man would find it incredibly difficult to advance his cultivation in the future. Leaning on the chair of the fortress lord's wife, Lu Tai rocked his bamboo folding fan and paid no heed to the threats of the disheveled Sea Observation Tier Cultivator. He had already forced the door of the large hall open, so the ominous scenes bearing down on the Flying Eagle Fortress were clear for all to see. A sea of murky darkness blotted out heaven and earth. It was very likely that the hundreds of residents in the Flying Eagle Fortress would never forget these scenes for the rest of their lives. This sense of fear and helplessness would be deeply ingrained in their minds. Moreover, the influence of today's events was bound to be profound and long-lasting. If these people survived, it was destined that stories of this calamity would be passed down from generation to generation. When immortals from the mountains fought, it was mortals from outside the mountains who would suffer. If all of the 9 continents in Majestic World were as lawless and unrestricted as this region, then utter chaos and calamity would have already swept through the world long ago. It was in order to prevent this outcome that the 3 schools and 72 academies of Confucianism had been founded. The purpose of these Confucian schools and academies was to prevent immortals from the mountains from lashing out in wanton rage and shattering mountains and rivers as they pleased, or even going as far as to casually destroy mortal cities on a whim. After all, immortals from the mountains also originated from the mortal world outside the mountains. If the mortal world were destroyed, then how could the mountains still exist? With this as the bottom line, the division between virtue and sin, good and evil was thus formed. Some qi refiners pursued the longevity and freedom of the great Tao. Since they were already standing atop the mountains, what did it matter whether the world prospered or burned? However, there were also some cultivators who were either pure and free from desire, uninterested in worldly matters, or strictly adhered to the rules. Some cultivators were willing to limit their own freedom for the sake of bringing peace to the mortal world. These cultivators didn't pursue absolute freedom. All kinds of people existed in the world, each with their own aspirations and needs. The notions of right and wrong were also like a tangled web. This was because far too many people only spoke reason and principles to constrain others. They didn't use the same reason and principles to constrain themselves. This was the same both in the mountains and outside the mountains. As a descendant of the Lu clan and as a disciple of the school of naturalists, Lu Tai had an even deeper understanding of human nature. Moreover, both his personal status and his status in his clan were very peculiar. This wasn't simply because he could casually nurture and wield 2 bonded flying swords even though he wasn't a sword cultivator. In fact, this wasn't because he had somehow obtained his mysterious and colorful ribbon when playing in his clan's ancestral hall during his childhood either. Instead, Lu Tai's existence was somewhat of a taboo in Middle-earth Divine Continent's Lu clan. To those taciturn and aged elders in the Lu clan, the existence of this junior was far too awkward. At the same time, however, Lu Tai was also incredibly outstanding and eye-catching. It was as if he were born in harmony with Tao. There was almost no precedent in history, so the Lu clan's attitude toward Lu Tai had always been extremely vague and ambiguous. The sages had a saying: rulers transformed like tigers, commoners followed the flow, and noble people transformed like leopards. 1. Lu Tai's physical body was much like an immortal treasure. In fact, it was even more mystical than the immortal body that Chan Ping'an's so-called disciple, the young Cui Chan, had stolen in the past. Lu Tai observed the sea of dark clouds in the sky and searched for the best moment to strike. However, he had already concealed the scenes inside the hall of the main building from the outside world, so it would be unfathomably difficult for the man with the fly whisk to send a message to his master. "I've made up my mind, esteemed immortal," the fortress lord's wife said in a soft voice. "What's your decision?" Lu Tai looked down and asked in slight puzzlement. There was a tragic yet determined look in the woman's eyes as she placed her hand on her heart and asked, "Can he live?" The woman wasn't a cultivator, yet the abnormality in her heart had already existed for several years. She was no fool either, so the sudden calamity befalling the Flying Eagle Fortress and the conversation between Lu Tai and the tall immortal in white had allowed her to join the dots together. She had roughly guessed the truth already. Lu Tai shook his head and replied, "The baby is innately opposed to the great Tao, with its nature one of violence and bloodthirst. Even if you sacrifice yourself to keep the baby alive, it will still grow up as a deadly threat in the future. At that time, the measly Flying Eagle Fortress won't even have the right to sacrifice itself to destroy the baby. Instead, it's extremely likely that the entire Agarwood nation will need to be sacrificed." The woman sobbed in grief and begged, "But I want my baby to live. I can feel its existence, and it's just like my own son or daughter." Lu Tai wasn't moved by the woman's motherly affection, nor did he view her request in disdain. Instead, he smiled calmly and revealed the truth to the pitiable woman, explaining, "Then are you aware that the baby has already gained sentience and intelligence? And it's because of this that it's purposely conveying false emotions to you? In fact, it will even rely on its instincts to subtly affect the emotions of you, its host. Otherwise, why have you never explained this matter to your husband, even though you're clearly aware of the abnormal changes taking place in your body?" The woman forcefully clutched her heart with one hand and hurriedly covered her mouth with her other hand. There was a pained expression on her face, and she seemed at a complete loss as she shook her head at Lu Tai. The woman silently endured a heart-wrenching pain as she looked at Lu Tai with a pleading expression in her eyes. Lu Tai sighed and asked, "Why are you going to such pains? Are you truly willing to abandon and sacrifice the hundreds of lives in the Flying Eagle Fortress? Just think about it, there's your husband Huan Yang, your children Huan Chong and Huan Shu, and also the fortress that has given birth to you and raised you. Are you going to abandon all of them? Abandon them simply for the sake of this unborn baby, one that's filthy and sinister before it's even born?" The woman simply sobbed and shook her head. She lowered her hand, and blood immediately started to gush from her mouth, pitch black like ink. This was extremely uncanny and terrifying. However, the woman no longer cared about her dignified bearing as the wife of the fortress lord. With her mind unclear and her vision unfocused as she begged Lu Tai, saying, "Please let my baby live, esteemed immortal, I'm begging you. What did my baby do wrong? Right now, my baby has only harmed a single person, me, its mother. However, I don't blame my baby, I don't blame it at all. Esteemed immortal, you can educate my baby in the future, and teach it to do good. You can guide it in the right direction and prevent it from walking down sinister paths. Esteemed immortal, your Tao power is profound and your abilities are omnipotent, so you can definitely succeed in teaching my baby. My baby will definitely become a good person." The woman was like a fractured porcelain vase on the verge of collapse. As her heart continued to violently shudder, she finally shattered once and for all, unable to endure the punishment any longer. However, her eyes remained firmly fixed on Lu Tai's face. Lu Tai smiled faintly and nodded, replying, "All right, your baby can live." Only after hearing this did the woman's mouth twitch, with her eyes also closing slowly. However, black blood continued to trickle and gurgle from her eyes in a ghastly manner. As it turned out, the rims of her eyes had also shattered, causing her eyeballs to fall onto her dress and eventually roll onto the ground, finally stopping behind her chair. The large hall was deathly silent. No one dared to say anything, and only Fortress Lord Huan Yang, who was bound to his chair with his 5 senses sealed, felt uncontrollable rage toward his wife, his closest family and companion. The rims of his eyes were bright red. How can she be so selfish? She was definitely possessed by a ghost. She definitely fell to demonic ways. Her death was completely deserved. She deserves to die with that little bastard, that piece of freak in her heart. Lu Tai walked over to the woman who was already dead, bending down and gazing at her heart which was completely drenched in blood, murmuring, "Your mother sacrificed so much for you, and she gave her everything for you, even abandoning her conscience as a human. Yet what about you? Why are you still furiously feeding on the spiritual energy and soul of her corpse? You already tortured her so much while she was alive, yet you're still unwilling to afford her a moment of peace even after she's passed away now." The chaotically undulating chest of the woman suddenly became still at this moment. It was as if one could hear the soft bawling of a baby arriving in the world, just like any other ordinary baby. The sound of crying had arrived. Lu Tai suddenly thrust his bamboo fan forward, piercing the woman's heart and pinning her to the chair. His face was expressionless as he said, "The world is very uninteresting, you shouldn't have come." An ear-piercing scream suddenly rang through the large hall, extinguishing the candles and causing the large columns to crack in unison. Everyone was filled with extreme fury and grief. Only Huan Yang felt a huge sense of relief. However, his feeling of relief quickly transformed into one of despondence. His eyes were vacant as he dazedly stared at the chair beside him. His wife, his childhood sweetheart, that warm and gentle woman, had died a very ugly death. However, the enraged man didn't know that tears were already streaming down his face. Outside the ancestral hall of the Huan clan, everyone had finally fought their way out after an almighty struggle, and the disheveled old man was using a secret technique taught to him by Fort Master Huan, setting the bowls that contained the blood of the Huan clan's descendants onto the ground. However, after waiting for a moment, he slumped to the ground with a look of despair on his face as he murmured to himself, "Why is this happening? It shouldn't be." The Huan siblings were drenched in blood, and their faces were deathly pale, while the young Taoist priest said in a trembling voice, "Those demons have somehow already exhausted all of the spiritual energy in the two stone lions." Tao Xiang sat down heavily onto the ground, while the old Taoist priest turned his gaze to the sea of clouds over at the training grounds, where streaks of swordlight were flashing incessantly. A tiny spark of hope arose in his heart as he struggled to his feet, then said to the four young people with him, "Leave the Flying Eagle Fortress right away. You were the ones who protected me on the way here, and now it's time for me to return the favor. You must survive in order to continue the lineage of the Huan clan. Do not hesitate. Leave this place right now, get as far away as you possibly can, and do not think about revenge." Tao Xiang displayed no intention of getting up, and he turned to the woman from the Huan clan as he said in a raspy voice, "Huan Shu, leave this place with Huan Chang. I'm going to stay here. I've traveled far and wide over the years, and I'm really starting to feel a little exhausted, so I'm not going with you." The young Taoist priest was just about to say something, but Tao Xiang shook his head to cut him off. "Don't try to dissuade me, Huang Shang. I've already made up my mind." The old Taoist priest heaved a forlorn sigh, then sped away toward the northern gate of the Flying Eagle Fortress with his disciple and the Huan siblings. Tears were welling up in Huang Shang's eyes as he rushed along behind his master, and he didn't dare to turn around to look at Tao Xiang. All of a sudden, Huan Shu turned back to look at Tao Xiang, and there were so many things that she wanted to say to him, but she was unable to muster up even a single word. One's most genuine emotions were often revealed during crises of life and death. In the end, she was dragged away by her brother, while a wry smile appeared on Tao Xiang's face as he looked down at the reflection of Huan Shu's face on the mirror-like surface of his trusty blade. In the instant that Lu Tai's bamboo fan was pierced through the heart of the ghost infant, an agonized howl instantly rang out from the hall of the main building. The old man in the tall hat appeared once again in the sea of black clouds outside the building, even as the two flying swords continued to wreak havoc, and he was furious. He was so enraged that even the five-mountain hat on his head was trembling, while the surrounding sea of clouds was also churning violently. "Useless trash. I should have never counted on you," he roared in the direction of the main building. The old man then reached out with one hand before clenching it into a tight fist. Inside the hall, the man who was fighting the pair of flying swords with his horsetail whisk had already fallen under the old man's control as a result of a secret technique, and his heart abruptly exploded without any warning, following which his soul and his body were separated, while all of the blood was also instantly drained from his body before forming an enormous ball of blood that began to barrel out of the room in a frenzy. The explosion of a C observation tier cultivator C of Qi released sufficient power to completely destroy the formation that had been taken over by Lu Tai, and all of the blood began to gush outward, attempting to flow toward the old man in the sea of clouds like a bird returning to its nest. Lu Tai's brows furrowed slightly as he withdrew needle tip and wheat on so that they weren't stained by this contaminated blood, and at the same time, he ceased his injection of spiritual energy into the formation. Hence, the blood was able to flow out of the hall before rising up to the old man in the sea of clouds, where it surged into the palm of the old man's hand. The old man's eyes instantly began to glow with radiant crimson light, and he swept both sleeves through the air to release 2 bursts of bright red qi, stirring up ferocious astral winds that forcibly dispersed 1st and 15th. The old man's expression became twisted with fury as he looked down at the central mountain that was hovering above the ground, then roared, "Your struggles are completely futile. I only crushed you under the mountain millstone to extract your blood essence bit by bit, as the ghost infant had only just been born and didn't possess the appetite required to devour your whole. But now that you've completely foiled my plans, there's no need for me to hold back any longer." At this point, Lu Tai had already arrived on the observation deck in the main building of the Flying Eagle Fortress, and he sped toward the old man in the sea of clouds atop his 2 flying swords as he chortled, "Our peace and tranquility mountain has already been waiting for this day for a very long time." The old man immediately burst into deranged laughter. "Even if I have to die here, I'm going to take you 2 down with me." He continued to sweep a sleeve through the air incessantly as he spoke, keeping 1st, 15th, needle tip and wheat on at bay, and at the same time, he clenched his other hand into a tight fist before throwing a vicious punch downward. Lu Tai's expression changed slightly, and a vibrant and colorful streamer suddenly rose up from the ascending sun platform, working with the demon-binding chain that was wrapped around the mountain to lift it upward. He absolutely couldn't afford to allow this central mountain to take root on the ground alongside the other 4 mountains. Otherwise, if the 5 mountains were united, Chen Ping'an would be crushed into a pile of mincemeat even if he were a 6th-tier martial artist, let alone a 4th-tier one. "Get up!" Lu Tai roared, and the mountain rose up a few feet. "Two can play at that game," the old man chortled as he rose to his feet, and he was certainly living up to his reputation as a cruel and vicious itinerant cultivator as he stowed away the cushion beneath him. His lower body instantly began to wither away before disintegrating into dust, yet he paid no heed to his as he flew over to the central mountain. Upon setting foot onto the mountain's summit, he pressed down with all his might, successfully forcing the mountain down onto the ground despite the restraints of the colorful belt and the golden demon-binding chain. As the central mountain landed on the ground, the entire Flying Eagle Fortress began to tremble violently, and huge rifts were even appearing over the mountain range outside the fort. The golden demon-binding chain slid down the mountain in a defeated fashion, while the old man chortled with glee and reached out to grab onto it. With the 5 mountains unified, the formation was complete. Over at the ascending sun platform, Lu Tai threw up a mouthful of blood as he stumbled back a few steps, and he had to grab onto the railing to steady himself as he commanded in a feeble voice, "Come back." The colorful belt around the central mountain had become completely devoid of luster, and it began to revert back to its original form before flying back toward the main building. The old man's eyes immediately lit up as he reached out to grab onto the belt as well. Having just obtained the demon-binding chain, he had now come into possession of what was undoubtedly another immortal treasure. Even though he had suffered extremely severe losses during this battle, he wasn't going to be leaving without any compensation. The old man sat down with his legs crossed once again, and the cushion reappeared beneath him. At this point, the 5-mountain hat on his head had almost been completely exhausted of spiritual energy. Over at the Sea of Clouds, only the 2 flying swords wielded by the swordsmen in the main building were still struggling against their bindings. As for the 2 miniature flying swords from before, the old man had been observing them this entire time, and he saw them fall into a pair of alleys in the distance after the central mountain had successfully crushed the golden-robed young boy. They were most likely destroyed, which was quite a pity, But the old man was still feeling very elated, nonetheless, having just exacted his revenge. He was no longer able to support the 5 mountains' true appearance formation, and he had to strip that golden Dao robe from the boy before leaving the Flying Eagle Fortress as soon as possible in order to avoid being intercepted by cultivators of the planchette riding sect or Peace and Tranquility Mountain. Otherwise, he would be forced to flee with his tail between his legs once again. Even up to this point, there had still been no intervention from any Golden Core or nascent tier patriarchs from Peace and Tranquility Mountain, so it appeared that the 2 young cultivators had bitten off more than they could chew and allowed him the opportunity to slip away. Having said that, these 2 young men were definitely among the most exceptional direct disciples of Peace and Tranquility Mountain. In fact, perhaps they were even prized disciples of the Mountain Master. Only that would explain why they had the courage to flaunt their collection of immortal treasures. If it weren't for the fact that he already had an irreversible vendetta against Peace and Tranquility Mountain, he would have most likely avoided this conflict. All of a sudden, the 5 mountains rose up from the ground at the old man's behest, then shrank down rapidly before returning to his 5-mountain hat. The old man continued to control the sea of clouds to oppose Needle Tip and Wheat On while lowering himself down toward the training grounds atop his cushion. There was an eye-catching patch of gold on the ground. It resembled a golden garment that had fallen from a clothesline and was draped haphazardly over the ground. Right as the old man was about to reach out for the Dao robe, his expression suddenly changed drastically, and he thrust his palms into the air up ahead, launching both himself and his cushion up into the air. In the wake of the grueling battle that had just come to pass, the sea of black clouds had been reduced to less than 1/10 of its original size, and it immediately surged toward the old man in a frenzy. The golden Dao robe was draped over a crater on the training grounds that was just large enough to fit a person, and the robe's wearer sprang out of the ground as he yelled, "Lu Tai, lend me your national treasury for a moment." Lu Tai wasn't surprised at all to see this, and Needle Tip instantly appeared beneath Chen Ping'an's feet at his behest. Lu Tai had already realized that Chen Ping'an wasn't dead back when 1st and 15th fell out of the sky. Chen Ping'an had told him that they were bonded flying swords, but they didn't belong to him, so there was no reason for them to fall out of the sky just because he had died. Hence, it was clear that he had instructed the 2 flying swords to put an act, while he also pretended to be dead. After that, the demon binding chain also began to play dead, and it took Lu Tai a great deal of self-control not to laugh out loud. Upon realizing Chen Ping'an's ploy, Lu Tai also played along, intentionally losing control of the colorful belt and allowing it to be taken by the old man. The old man was retreating at an incredible speed, but 1st and 15th had already concealed themselves nearby, and they were even faster. The 2 of them instantly pierced through the cushion beneath the old man, slowing him down slightly in the process, and Wheat On also appeared up above to intercept him. At the same time, Lu Tai's colorful belt and Chen Ping'an's demon binding chain suddenly sprang back to life, winding themselves around the old man's arms like a pair of constricting pythons. Meanwhile, Chen Ping'an rose up into the sky atop Needle Tip to pursue the old man in the sea of clouds. Lu Tai's colorful belt had stalled the central mountain momentarily, thereby preventing it from immediately crashing down upon Chen Ping'an. Taking advantage of that brief window of opportunity, Chen Ping'an had smashed a crater large enough to accommodate him into the ground with his fists, thereby avoiding the terrible fate of being crushed by the mountain. However, the vast aura of the 5 mountains' true appearance formation had still fallen upon him with tremendous force, essentially entombing him into the ground and breaking many of his ribs. If it weren't for the extraordinary pain tolerance that he had built up from his training in the bamboo building, he would have only been able to look on helplessly as the old man fled the scene. Prior to ascending into the air atop Needle Tip, Chen Ping'an had picked up Infatuation, which had been discarded earlier. Not only had the colorful belt and the demon-binding chain wound themselves around the old man's arms, they were also serving as a beacon of sorts, guiding the 3 flying swords to pierce through the cushion. As a result, Chen Ping'an was able to catch up to the old man very quickly, then lashed out with his sword at the back of the old man's head. The old man lurched forward with all his might atop the sea of clouds, and he was only just barely able to evade the sword strike, but a large gash was still sliced into his head by the sword chi released by the sword. Over at the ascending sun platform, Lu Tai gritted his teeth, then sped through the air with his robes flapping around him, moving even faster than Needle Tip. He circled around in midair, and shortly thereafter, he appeared in front of the old man to block his path of escape. At this point, the old man had become very wary of the two young cultivators, and he didn't dare to try and charge straight through Lu Tai, so he decided to go around him. However, as he did this, the sword of the golden-robed young boy abruptly pierced straight through his body. Furthermore, the sword was very strange in that it was absorbing both his vitality and his spiritual energy. The old man stopped cold in his tracks, as did the sea of clouds beneath the cushion. He then looked down at the tip of the sword protruding out of his body with a bleak smile. It wasn't the 4 bonded flying swords that had taken his life. Instead, what had helped this sword claim his life was the inch movement talisman that he had looked down on earlier. Since when did these young rascals from cultivating sects become even more sly and cunning than itinerant cultivators like myself? Chun Ping'an was about to jump on this opportunity to smash open the old man's head with his fist, thereby ensuring beyond a doubt that he was killed. However, he was dissuaded from following through on this plan by a panicked yell from Lu Tai, telling him to get back in retreat as quickly as he could. The old man adjusted the crooked 5-mountain hat on his head, and instead of pulling infatuation out of his body, he turned to Lu Tai with a sinister smile on his face. His arms were still bound tightly by the pair of immortal treasures, which were severely limiting his spiritual energy circulation, while his cushion was severely ravaged, having had dozens of holes pierced through it by the 3 flying swords. Even so, Lu Tai was still watching the old man with an apprehensive expression. He had intentionally proclaimed himself to be a cultivator of Peace and Tranquility Mountain in order to intimidate the old man into retreat, but it had achieved the complete opposite effect, and the old man had immediately attacked them like a rabid dog. While they had the upper hand now, Chun Ping'an had well and truly only survived by the skin of his teeth. Lu Tai took a moment to compose himself, then declared, "We're not actually cultivators of Peace and Tranquility Mountain." A wry smile appeared on the old man's face as he replied, "I already figured that out just now. There's no way that a pair of crafty rascals like yourselves could have come out of Peace and Tranquility Mountain." The surrounding sea of clouds gradually dissipated and returned to heaven and earth as he spoke. Battles between immortals always took place in the heavens, but most unions and separations took place in the mortal world. At this moment, there was a strange atmosphere in the hall of the Flying Eagle Fortress's main building. Fort Master Huan Yang had already regained his mobility, but he refused to look at the body of the woman on the chair next to him. The old steward, Hiya, took a sympathetic glance at the fort mistress, and he opened his mouth to say something, but decided against it after receiving a cold glare from Huan Yang. Huan Yang placed a hand down onto the armrest of his chair, then declared in a grim voice, "No one is to speak of what happened in this room today. If anyone dares to reveal what happened here to any outsiders, not only will they be punished according to our clan's rules, everyone staying in the room with them will have their arms and legs broken before being banished from the Flying Eagle Fortress." Huan Yang was still refusing to look at the chair beside him as he gestured at the body of the woman and continued, "As far as all of you are concerned, she fell ill from overworking herself, and she wasn't able to recover. Her memorial tablet is not to be placed in our Huan clan's ancestral hall, nor is she to be buried behind the mountain." Everyone in the hall remained completely silent, with no one daring to raise any objections. Hiya was finally unable to remain silent any longer, and he stepped forward as he implored with a heartbroken expression, "Fort Master, I understand that the mistress made some mistakes, but please think about all of the contributions that she's made to the clan over the years and allow her to be buried behind the mountain. I beg you to reconsider, Fort Master." The old steward erupted into sobs as he spoke, and Huan Yang slammed a hand down onto the armrest of his chair in a fit of fury, instantly destroying the entire chair. After considering Hiya's request momentarily with a dark look on his face, he harumphed coldly, "We'll discuss this matter another time." Huan Yang had always been a very kind and benevolent figure, yet at this moment, he was watching everyone like a starving hawk, and everyone hurriedly lowered their heads, not daring to meet his gaze. It's still yet to be seen whether our Flying Eagle Fortress will be able to survive this ordeal. For now, none of you are to leave this place. Hiya, if anyone tries to leave, kill them on the spot." After making this declaration, Huan Yang departed from the hall on his own, then made his way up to the ascending sun platform. From there, He cast his gaze into the distance, trying to see the outcome of the battle that was raging in that direction, but unfortunately, his eyesight was rather lackluster due to his mediocre martial arts cultivation base, so he was unable to see anything aside from the dissipating sea of clouds and flashes of sword light. If the ghost infant really is as powerful as they say, then it would be great if our Flying Eagle Fortress could control it. He spat through gritted teeth. The old Taoist priest successfully fled from the Flying Eagle Fortress with the young trio, and from there, they made their way deep into the mountain to the north. The journey was incredibly smooth, and they didn't encounter any trouble aside from the occasional spirit or an entity that got in their way. The old Taoist priest and the three young individuals were all stunned by this drastic turn in their fortunes, and all four of them were left at a slight loss for what to do. All of a sudden, Huan Chong declared, "I have to go back." The old Taoist priest gave an internal nod of approval. While this was a rather naive sentiment at the very least, it showed that he had the heart required to lead the Huan clan on a future resurgence. If he had focused solely on running for his life, then the old Taoist priest would have been unable to help but look down on him. The inky black sea of clouds had already dissipated, and while that wasn't a definitive sign of whether the Flying Eagle Fortress had managed to weather the crisis, it was still a good sign nonetheless. The old Taoist priest cast his gaze toward the Flying Eagle Fortress, using a mystical ability to observe the energy there, and he discovered that the dense energy in the fort had almost completely faded. Don't be in such a hurry to go back. Right now it seems like the tide is turning in our favor, but if you make a premature return, things could just as quickly go awry again, the old Taoist priest cautioned. Huan Chong grabbed onto the hilt of his blade, and veins bulged on the back of his hand as he spat through gritted teeth. "My parents are still in danger. If I do nothing but stand by and watch, then I'm not fit to be their son." The old Taoist priest's approval for the young man grew even further upon seeing this, and he patiently explained, "Sacrifices for no just cause are not a show of true courage. Huan Chong, you have to be like your grandfather, the type of man who'll only commit the heroic deed of cutting down the Taoist enforcer statue when retreat is no longer an option. Even for cultivators living in seclusion like myself, all of us are in admiration of his heroism. In order to be a hero, courage and discretion are required in equal measure. Only a fool would throw their life away for nothing." Huan Chong nodded in response with a sullen expression. Ultimately, he was not the type of stubborn person who couldn't see the light of reason. If he weren't sufficiently understanding and tolerant, then he would have already banished Tao Sheong long ago. Huan Shu gently tugged on his sleeve with a concerned expression, and he turned to her with a smile as he reassured, "Don't worry about me, I'm fine." The old Taoist priest was very happy to see this. He saw a great deal of hope for the future in this young man. Meanwhile, Huang Shang asked, "Master, will those two outsiders really be able to kill that devilish fiend?" A wry smile appeared on the old Taoist priest's face as he sighed. "There's a very good chance that we're dealing with a golden core tier devilish cultivator here, given that they were able to set up such an enormous formation and reverse the fortunes of the land in such a huge area. My master was considered to be a prodigious cultivator, yet even in his prime, he wouldn't have been able to match that mountain-moving feat. It would already be extremely fortunate if those two young men can somehow chase that fiend away, but killing him would be entirely impossible." After fleeing from the Flying Eagle Fortress, the old Taoist priest was feeling a bit more relaxed, and with that came a wave of exhaustion that left him feeling a little shaky on his feet. He had truly overexerted himself both mentally and physically during that battle, and he leaned against a tree for support as he continued, "Unless a powerful cultivator from Planchette Writing Sect receives word of this and arrives on the scene, it'll be very difficult to stop that devilish cultivator from getting away." Huan Shu bit down onto her own lower lip, and there was a myriad of emotions swirling in her heart. Her parents were still in grave peril, and an idiot was willing to sacrifice himself outside the ancestral hall. Even if she and her brother could survive this ordeal, the future was still very murky, and she had no idea where they were supposed to go. Huang Shang was also looking quite dejected. He had cultivated with impeccable diligence for several years, and he had thought that he had attained sufficient power to make a difference in the world, yet he had almost lost his life in just the Flying Eagle Fortress. After taking a deep breath, the old Taoist priest broke the gloomy silence as he smiled and said, "Don't worry, if that fiend dares to make a return, then he'll surely attract the attention of Planchette Writing Sect, so he won't dare to wreak any further havoc over the next century. There are two powerful immortals in planchette writing sect who are a couple, and if they feel that their authority is being challenged, then either one of them could come and slay that fiend with ease. Outside the ancestral hall, Tao Xiang remained seated with a concerned expression. He wasn't worried about what was happening to the Flying Eagle Fortress. Instead, he was worried that the patriarch of the clan who had left him here as a young boy would suffer excessively severe losses from this battle, thereby preventing him from being able to rise to the pinnacle of Deep Fragrance Nation. He had watched Huan Shu grow up from a little girl into a fine young woman, and he truly loved her with all his heart. He wanted to claim her, as well as his rightful spot at the pinnacle of Deep Fragrance Nation, and perhaps he would even get the opportunity to scale to the summit of the cultivation world in the future. On the few occasions where he had been able to meet the patriarch in secret while under the guise of running errands for the Huan clan, the patriarch had told him that if he liked something, then he should grab it firmly. If he couldn't do that, then he should just forget about that thing or destroy it outright. Tao Xiang regarded this as sagely advice. With no one around, Tao Xiang took a moment to compose himself as he contemplated how to proceed from here. In the end, he found the useless stone lion to be a real eyesore, so he hacked it into pieces with his blade, sending it crumbling to the ground. After venting his frustration, he immediately realized that this was a mistake. If the patriarch's plan were to fail, and he was forced to return to fall back and recuperate, then he could very easily notice the remnants of the stone lion and deduce that Tao Xiang had taken out his frustrations on it. Upon making this realization, Tao Xiang hurriedly made his way over to the remnants of the stone lion, then injected his true qi into his blade before hacking the fallen stone lion into bits. After that, he began to make his way toward the main building of the Flying Eagle Fortress, and on the way there, he thrust his palm into his own chest, causing him to throw up a mouthful of blood. The cultivation world was a perilous place where any misstep could result in catastrophic consequences. The human heart was the most unpredictable thing under the heavens, and to remain pure and steadfast was an exceedingly difficult feat high up in the sky far away from the Flying Eagle Fortress. The battle taking place there was going to decide the fate of the entire fort. The two young boys had 3 bonded flying swords, a demon binding chain, and the colorful belt on their side, while the old man was in truly dire straits, having been worn down by the seemingly never-ending array of immortal treasures at the disposal of his 2 young opponents. In the face of these 2 inexplicably monstrous young boys, the old man seemed to know that death was inevitable for him, and there was a resigned and melancholic look on his face. If it wasn't for that, I would have detonated my own golden core when that boy in gold stabbed me with his sword, then blown up my remaining Yin God to take you down with me. At my peak, I was a golden core tier cultivator on the brink of the nascent tier, so even if you could survive, you definitely wouldn't have been able to do so unscathed. In fact, there's a very good chance that you'll lose this body of yours. Lu Tai nodded in response, making no effort to deny this claim. All the while, he was keeping a constant eye on the old man's arms out of his peripheral vision. Those 2 immortal treasures were the keys to keeping the old man bound in place. The old man was quickly able to detect the direction of his gaze, and he looked down as he mused. Both of these are exceptional treasures. He then looked around with a hint of dejection in his eyes as he continued. Many years ago, a disciple of a patriarch of Peace and Tranquility Mountain took a liking to my 5-mountain hat, but I was unwilling to hand it over to him, and that was what sent me down this path of no return. Those 2 were true prodigies on the same level as you 2, and they would have definitely been able to reach the golden core tier, perhaps even the nascent tier if they were lucky. Peace and Tranquility Mountain was completely enraged, and it threw all grace and goodwill to the wind. On the surface it appeared that a young golden core tier cultivator had challenged me to a battle, and the outcome was a heavy defeat for me that sent my cultivation base plummeting. But do you want to know what actually happened? There was a nascent tier earth immortal constantly overseeing the battle, and he wanted to use me as a training tool for the young golden core tier cultivator. Not only was he able to earn himself a resounding reputation by defeating a well-established golden core tier cultivator, he was also able to consolidate his own cultivation base through the battle. I was used like a tool, and every last shred of usefulness was extracted out of me before I was discarded. These powerful sects really are something else, aren't they? Lu Tai cast his gaze past the old man toward Chan Ping'an in the distance. He was able to directly communicate into Chen Ping'an's mind while ensuring that no cultivator of the middle 5 tiers could eavesdrop on what he was saying, but Chen Ping'an wasn't able to reply. In the eyes of common mortals, the ability of martial artists to compress their voices into thin lines as a means of covert communication was nothing short of extraordinary, but to cultivators, this was the most crude form of direct communication that one could possibly stoop to. Hence, if Lu Tai wanted to know Chen Ping'an's decision, then he could only find out through eye contact. The old man was well aware of what the 2 young boys were doing, but he paid no heed to their silent exchange as he raised an arm with great difficulty, then extended a finger before gently flicking the sharp tip of the sword that was protruding out of his chest, immediately causing him to throw up a mouthful of blood. Despite this, he remained calm and composed as he continued, "If I'm not mistaken, this appears to be the sword purchased by the number 1 swordsman of Deep Fragrance Nation from Planchette Writing Sect for a very steep price. It could be considered a pseudo-immortal treasure to begin with, and now that it's devoured the blood of my heart, it's finally progressed into a full-fledged immortal treasure." The old man burst into laughter as he turned to Chen Ping'an and remarked, "You really are an incredibly wealthy kid. I don't know why you haven't drawn the longsword that you carry on your back this entire battle, but I presume that it's yet another immortal treasure, right?" Chen Ping'an offered no response to this. The old man cast his gaze up toward the heavens, then took a deep breath while his robes flapped audibly in the fierce wind. "You 2 rascals have put an end to my life here, so don't even think about claiming all of my belongings. This is about as spectacular a death as I could ask for. The sword that's impaled my heart, the belt and the demon-binding chain around my arms, the 5 mountain hat on my head, and the cushion beneath me right now are all immortal treasures. To be able to take down 5 immortal treasures with me is a fate worthy of a nascent soul-tier earth immortal. If I can take those 3 bonded flying swords with me as well, then that would be a worthy death even for an immortal of the upper 5 tiers." The old man's body began to disintegrate as he spoke, and ashes began to drift down from his body bit by bit, but a burst of piercing light began to emerge within his dantian. At the same time, 1st, 15th, and Wheat on all darted back in retreat as quickly as they could, trying to get far away from the old man as he prepared to detonate his own dantian. Infatuation also pulled itself out of the old man's body at Chen Ping'an's behest, but prior to doing so, it twisted itself around viciously to ensure that the old man's heart was completely torn to shreds. It was clear that Chen Ping'an was intent on ensuring the old man's death, even if it meant risking the destruction of infatuation. The old man lowered his gaze, and as Lu Tai's colorful belt slid off his arm, he immediately felt a heavy weight being lifted from his body. He then turned to golden demon-binding chain on his other arm, expecting it to also be withdrawn, but to his astonishment, not only did the demon-binding chain not extricate itself from around his arm, it only wound itself around him even tighter, seemingly intent on binding him to the bitter end. Even after putting on such a convincing act, the old man still found himself bound into place, and in his final moments, he was finally unable to conceal the fury and panic that he had been suppressing deep in his heart this entire time. The panic and unease that he was feeling now wasn't any less overwhelming than what he had felt back when he was being hunted down by that young golden core tier cultivator of Peace and Tranquility Mountain. The old man had completely made up that story about how a nascent tier earth immortal had been present during his battle against the young golden core tier cultivator, and it was all in a bid to evoke sympathy in the hearts of the 2 young boys, as well as to manufacture a facade that he was ready to face his death. In his mind, once he was freed from the demon-binding chain and the colorful belt, he would be able to abandon his physical body and cultivation base to flee the scene in the form of a Yin god. Doing so would harm the foundation of his great Tao, but it was certainly still better than falling to his demise here. Once he escaped, he would be able to find some gullible young fool with good cultivation aptitude, then fabricate some tragic backstory for himself to win their trust. After that, he would assist them diligently in their cultivation, then find an opportunity to take over their body and possess them at some point. I can't wait any longer. Even though the demon-binding chain was still wound around his arm, it would be too late if he didn't make his escape now. With that in mind, the old man's core abode and sea of qi exploded in unison. The cushion beneath him was completely destroyed, while the 5 mountain hat on his head was sent flying toward Chen Ping'an by the force of the explosion. Powerful shockwaves erupted through the air in all directions, and as a qi refiner, Lu Tai was struggling to withstand the force of the explosion. Even though he was already over 100 meters away, he was still forced further back into retreat. Despite the severe peril that he was in, he was still doing everything in his power to communicate directly into Qian Ping'an's mind, telling him to find a spot where he could ensure his own safety, then use the explosion as an opportunity to refine his body and soul, a process that would surely be immensely beneficial to him. Through all the chaos and debris thrown up by the explosion, Lu Tai was unable to see Qian Ping'an clearly, but he was confident that given Qian Ping'an's cautious nature, he would definitely be able to look after himself. Even without his own realization, Lu Tai had developed a great deal of trust in Qian Ping'an, regarding him as an equal. In fact, when it came to certain important decisions, he would be more inclined to defer to Qian Ping'an's better judgment, rather than his own. This was quite remarkable for a chi refiner, who normally looked down on martial artists, particularly for an exceptional prodigy like Lu Tai. At this point, the old man had already come to terms with the fact that his plan wasn't going to be executed to perfection. He could sense several flying swords lurking nearby, but he knew that he had to make his escape now. Hence, as his core abode exploded amid an eruption of blinding light, a wisp of his soul picked out a relatively safe direction before darting up higher into the sky as quickly as it could. Even though the demon-binding chain was still wound tightly around his soul, its binding effects were negligible in the face of the force generated by the explosion. Unfortunately for him, Qian Ping'an didn't fall for his ploy at all. Instead of reaching out to catch the five-mountain hat, Qian Ping'an merely allowed it to fall out of the sky, and he immediately set off after the old man's soul without any delay. However, the old man was confident that Qian Ping'an wouldn't be able to catch him, even while traveling atop that powerful flying sword. He would have to ride atop the flying sword while simultaneously using inch movement talismans, and he would have had to pinpoint the direction of the old man's escape in advance. Only with all three prerequisites satisfied would be able to successfully intercept the old man's soul. Furthermore, there was only a very brief window during which this opportunity could be captured, as the old man's soul was going to be able to struggle free from the demon-binding chain very soon. In the wake of the detonation of the old man's core abode and sea of qi, the spiritual energy in the demon-binding chain had been worn down significantly, and it wasn't going to be able to hold on for much longer. However, the old man's worst fears were quickly realized. High up in the sky, Qian Ping'an used 2-inch movement talismans in succession, the first of which allowed him to leave Needle Tip behind, while the second took him directly to the old man's fleeing soul. From there, he drew Long Qi for the first time, and in that instant, his mind was completely empty, focused solely on the recollection of the sword strike that Mr. Qi had dealt upon Lu Qiqing back in the rundown temple. With a swing of his sword, the old man's soul was completely erased out of existence like a withered leaf in the face of a raging flood. After dealing the killing blow, Qian Ping'an was also completely spent. His sword-wielding arm had been completely stripped of all flesh, reducing it nothing more than bone. As a result, he was no longer able to grip onto lasting qi, and it fell out of the sky. On top of that, Qian Ping'an himself also began to plummet toward the ground in free fall. First and 15th were whizzing around him in an urgent and agitated fashion, but it wasn't like they could catch him. Thankfully, Lu Tai was able to take flight using the lotus flower talismans attached to his arms and legs, and he swooped in right in the nick of time to catch Qian Ping'an in midair, then carefully set him down onto Needle Tip, while Lu Tai himself stood in the air beside the flying sword. He took in Qian Ping'an's terrible physical condition, and a combination of concern and anger welled up in his heart as he yelled, "How could you be so reckless, Qian Ping'an? Do you have a death wish? So what if you allowed him to get away? All that was left of him was his soul. Even if he makes a return, that'll at least be decades or even over a century in the future. By then, he'll be no match for us." Qian Ping'an turned to the side to throw up a mouthful of blood, and somehow, he was still in the mood to look at the distant scenery. After looking out into space for a while, Qian Ping'an turned his gaze back to the spot in the sky where the old man had met his demise, and there was no pride or joy in his eyes. Ultimately, he had killed someone, and that was not something that he was proud of. Lu Tai hurriedly pulled out a small vial, then poured a viscous and fragrant ointment onto the palm of his hand before carefully rubbing it onto Qian Ping'an's unsightly arm. Even with his incredible pain tolerance, Chan Ping'an couldn't help but grimace in agony. I know it hurts now, but this medicine can help you grow your arm back, Lu Tai consoled in a low voice. He then noticed Chan Ping'an scouring his surroundings, seemingly searching for something, and he immediately realized what he was looking for. I've already recovered that long sword and that demon-binding chain of yours, and they're currently in my belt right now. However, the demon-binding chain is very severely damaged, and it'll cost a lot of snowflake coins to have it repaired. Having said that, I'll be footing the bill so you don't have to worry about that. Chan Ping'an heaved a sigh of relief, then asked, What about that hat? Lu Tai rolled his eyes in response. We're in the middle of nowhere, so there's no one else around to pick it up by chance. Focus on resting up now, and we'll find the cap later. With that, the two of them slowly descended back down onto the ground. Chan Ping'an was a little saddened by the fact that the cushion had been destroyed. After slaying such a powerful devilish cultivator, all they had to show for their efforts was the 5-mountain hat. However, by advancing against the flow and insisting on slaying the old man on the spot, Chan Ping'an's soul had been refined to a great extent, serving as an additional reward that he had reaped from this battle. For the very first time, he felt like his 4th-tier cultivation base had been consolidated, and it was no longer feeling insubstantial and unfathomable. This was a very similar fated opportunity to the choice that Gukan's father had made during the journey to Great Sui Nation. Hence, in Chan Ping'an's mind, even if the 5-mountain hat and the demon-binding chain had been completely destroyed, he would have still felt like it was an even trade, and given how things had actually turned out, the outcome was a resoundingly positive one. Setting aside everything, infatuation had been significantly enhanced, and he could sell it for a huge profit. However, all immortal treasures were ultimately external tools, and only fist and sword techniques formed the true basis of Chan Ping'an's power. All of a sudden, Lu Tai smiled as he said, That 5-mountain hat looks really pretty, and I don't think that old man was even able to unleash its full power. I presume that's because he didn't know the true origins of the 5-mountain hat. Once I get back to Middle-earth Divine Continent, I'll go and have a browse through our clan's scripture library, and I may be able to dig up some information on it. So that means you're claiming the 5-mountain hat, I see. Even before you say anything, I know exactly what's going to come out of your pie hole. Chan Ping'an chuckled. Do you have to be so crass, Chan Ping'an? All those literary classics that you've read have gone to waste. Lu Tai grumbled. We're both men here, why get hung up over such trivial matters? Chan Ping'an countered, in response to which Lu Tai rolled his eyes in an effeminate fashion. Even though they had already traveled together on the treasure-swallowing whale all the way from Stalactite Mountain to Parasol Leaf Continent, Chan Ping'an still couldn't help but get goosebumps whenever Lu Tai did something like that. As the two of them landed in the forest outside the Flying Eagle Fortress, Wheat On vanished into Lu Tai's body at his behest, following which he revealed, compared with Needle Tip, Wheat On is rather mediocre when it comes to destructive power, but Wheat On has always had a very rare ability, which is treasure detection. Did you hear that? Chan Ping'an asked as he patted his sword-nurturing gourd. You two are flying swords as well, but you don't have any abilities like that, do you? However, this time Even First didn't retaliate against Chan Ping'an for that jibe, perhaps because it was feeling rather sheepish as it had contributed in this battle anywhere near as much as it had back at the City God Temple and against that formidable army. However, the true reason for its lack of response was that despite what Chan Ping'an was saying internally, he was filled with gratitude toward First and 15th. Chan Ping'an sat down with his legs crossed at the foot of a large tree, then grimaced slightly after taking a glance at his own unsightly arm. All of a sudden, Lu Tai fell silent, and tears began to well up in his eyes. Stop crying like a sniveling little girl, Chan Ping'an snapped, following which a wide smile appeared on his face. Back in the bamboo building on Downtrodden Mountain, he had felt very dejected after receiving those same harsh words from Cui Chan's grandfather, but now that he was the one dishing it out, it was a very good feeling. Lu Tai drew some solace at the sight of the beaming smile that had appeared on Chan Ping'an's face, and he sat down across from him as he asked, Why did you take such a huge risk? A justified look appeared on Chan Ping'an's face as he replied, Didn't we agree in advance that you were going to the main building of the Flying Eagle Fortress, while I was going to take care of the Sea of Clouds? I made a promise to you, so I had to follow through. On top of that, he was determined to kill me, so my back was against the wall, and I had no choice but to put my life on the line. After a brief pause, Chen Ping'an continued. At that point, there was already no possibility for reconciliation, so I had to prepare for the worst outcome. Even if the demon binding chain had been destroyed, I wouldn't have put the blame on you as it was my decision. It's just like what happened when we were dealing with that group of robbers. I felt like we had already done enough, yet you insisted on going after the one who was pulling the strings behind the scenes, except this time, our roles were reversed. I must apologize. That belt is my bonded treasure, so I couldn't afford to let it get damaged, Lu Tai said in an apologetic manner. Chen Ping'an waved a dismissive hand in response, indicating that it was all water under the bridge. He then took a glance at the glum look on Lu Tai's face, and he smiled as he consoled. I'm not letting you off the hook because I think it doesn't matter. Instead, it's because I trust you, so I was confident that you had to have had your reasons for what you did. There's no need to explain things in excessive detail between friends. Tears began to well up Lu Tai's eyes again, and Chen Ping'an sighed. It's a real pity that you're not a woman. Some time ago, I was traveling with a pair of friends, the young Taoist priest and the wandering hero that I told you about, and they don't place anywhere near as much weight on these trivial matters as you do. Someone who was very quick to regard others as their friends often never ended up with any true friends, and someone who always liked to refer to others as their brothers often didn't have anyone with whom they shared a true brotherly bond. Hence, Lu Tai knew just how significant it was for Chen Ping'an to be referring to him as his friend. It implied that Chen Ping'an trusted him with his life, and Chen Ping'an had shown that to be the case. With the 5 mountains on top of him, even though Chen Ping'an had dug himself a safe haven of sorts in the form of that crater, if Lu Tai had been too slow to act, then Chen Ping'an would have still suffocated to death under the immense spiritual energy of the formation. The thought of this made Lu Tai want to shed tears again, and he was indeed becoming more and more like a sniveling woman by the second. Back in that small courtyard, he had been the only one present to hear Chen Ping'an talk about his dreams and aspirations, and with that in mind, he declared in a determined voice, Chen Ping'an, when we split the spoils from this battle, I'm going to make sure that you make an absolute killing. Chen Ping'an couldn't be bothered to respond, so he merely rolled his eyes. A long silence ensued, and in the end it was Lu Tai who broke the silence as he mused. Chen Ping'an, you fear death while I fear living. We really are quite similar to one another, aren't we? Of course not, I'm way manlier than you, Chen Ping'an objected with a shake of his head. It was very rare for Lu Tai to be so open and vulnerable with anyone, and he was furious to have received such a cold and stoic response. Chen Ping'an, why are you so boring? I'm a man. Why would I want another man to find me interesting? Is there something wrong with me? Chen Ping'an asked. Fine, I'm the one who has something wrong with me. Lu Tai sighed in a sullen manner, then continued in a barely audible voice. To be honest, even I don't know if I'm a man or a woman. Chen Ping'an's hearing was very sharp, and he was stunned to hear this. What the hell's that supposed to mean? Lu Tai laid down onto the ground as he replied. I mean exactly what I said. I'm a freak. The only ones who know my secret are my parents, my 2 masters, a patriarch of my clan, and you're the 6th one. Only after stepping onto the ascending sun platform can I truly. At the end, Lu Tai's voice had trailed off to such an extent that Chen Ping'an couldn't make out what he was saying. He wanted to say something but was rather hesitant. If you have something to say, then say it. I told you my secret, so I'm prepared for any response from you, Lu Tai said as he stared blankly up at the sky. Chen Ping'an scooted over a little closer to Lu Tai, and there was a combination of curiosity and embarrassment on his face as he asked in a quiet voice. When women have that time of the month, it really hurts, right? A bewildered and enraged look appeared on Lu Tai's face, and he spat through gritted teeth. Why don't you ask that to the girl that you like? I don't want to die, Chen Ping'an replied as he scratched his own head in a sheepish fashion. All of a sudden, Lu Tai burst into laughter as he pointed at Chen Ping'an's arm, and only then did Chen Ping'an realize that he had inadvertently scratched his head with the arm that was still healing, and just the act of moving it had been enough to send jolts of excruciating pain shooting through his entire body. The two of them fell silent again. As Lu Tai sat up, he suddenly discovered that Chen Ping'an seemed depressed, and not just a little depressed. This was utterly inexplicable to Lu Tai as he couldn't think of anything that could possibly put Chen Ping'an in such a terrible mood. He then noticed a small seal sitting on Chen Ping'an's knee, one that he had never seen before. Ultimately, the Flying Eagle Fortress had managed to survive this ordeal largely unscathed, and Chen Ping'an was also alive and well, as was the case for everyone in Jewel's small world. Not only was Chen Ping'an alive and well, he had even gone on such long journeys and seen so much of the world, and all of that was thanks to Mr. Qi. But where was Mr. Qi right now? On the way back, Chen Ping'an's mood had already returned to normal, and flesh was slowly growing back on his skeletal arm. A series of meridians could be seen interspersed throughout the muscle fibers like thin vines, presenting a profound sight to behold. Chen Ping'an was closely observing these meridians like a scholar intently studying a subject, and Lu Tai was truly disgusted to see this. The Lu clan had some formidable martial artists among its ranks, but none of them would have had anywhere near the same level of mental fortitude as Chen Ping'an back when they were at the 4th tier. Despite the excruciating pain, Chen Ping'an was watching with keen interest as these meridians grew, and it was quite an educational experience, providing him with answers to many questions on the subject of qi circulation that had previously stumped him. As they approached the Flying Eagle Fortress, Chen Ping'an had to conceal his arm so that he wasn't mistaken for a devilish cultivator by the residents of the fort. Thankfully, his Dao robe was able to conceal his grisly arm, while also posing no impediment to the healing process. Earlier, Wheat On had already recovered the 5-mountain hat, and Lu Tai had examined it momentarily before concluding that it was a very old immortal treasure of a very high caliber. The true appearances of the 5 mountains were depicted on the cap, and the style and techniques employed both indicated that this cap had come from Middle-earth Divine Continent before somehow finding its way to Parasol Leaf Continent. Perhaps it was originally the bonded treasure of a certain renowned mountain god of Middle-earth Divine Continent. Chen Ping'an was quite interested in hearing about these topics as he wanted to broaden his own horizons. As for whether Lu Tai was going to lay sole claim to the 5-mountain hat or whether he was intentionally downplaying the cap's value, those questions didn't really weigh on Chen Ping'an's mind as he didn't think Lu Tai was that type of person. Humans were fickle and unpredictable creatures, so it was necessary to be cautious at all times, but it was never a good thing to condemn good and innocent people out of excessive paranoia. Instead of heading straight to the main building of the Flying Eagle Fortress, the two of them secretly made their way to the training grounds first to recover infatuation. After absorbing the spiritual energy and the heart blood of a cultivator at the pinnacle of the Dragon Gate tier, the blade of the sword had become even brighter and more translucent, and the patterns etched on its surface were rippling like water. At his peak, he most likely really had reached the cusp of the nascent tier, and a cultivator of that caliber would be able to stake a foothold for themselves even on Middle-earth Divine Continent. Hence, infatuation had been extremely fortunate to have devoured the old man's heart blood. In light of this, Lu Tai advised Chen Ping'an not to sell infatuation. Instead, if he were to encounter any evil cultivators or devilish entities in the future, he could run the sword through their hearts, killing 2 birds with 1 stone by enhancing the sword, as well as accumulating good karma for himself by slaying such forces of evil. Lu Tai could see that Chen Ping'an was rather hesitant, and in a rare display of assertiveness, he began scolding Chen Ping'an. It would be an outright lie to claim that there's no good or evil among cultivators, but no such distinction exists in treasures and artifacts. If you use a so-called evil treasure to do good deeds, then it becomes a force for good. Lu Tai became more and more enraged as he spoke, and he continued, "Don't tell me you can't get over such a minor mental hurdle when you can watch your own arm regrow without batting an eyelid. If you're going to be so stubborn and dogmatic, then I suggest you give up on any aspirations of cultivation and resign yourself to being a pure martial artist for the rest of your life. Given your personality, even if you manage to become a qi refiner, the inner demons that you'll have to face in order to break through your upper 5 tiers bottleneck will surely be completely insurmountable. All qi refiners who are able to reach the nascent tier already possess an extremely remarkable combination of courage, powers, willpower, and resilience. But do you know why it's so difficult for them to ascend to the upper 5 tiers? Contrary to what most people think, the main obstacle standing in their path isn't the heavenly tribulation that they have to transcend. Instead, the most difficult task for them is to overcome themselves. The loftier your Tao heart and the more unyielding your personality, the more powerful your inner demons will be. If you continue to cling onto your dogmas and stubborn ways, you'll never be able to overcome your inner demons. Chen Ping'an didn't rebuke Lu Tai. Instead, He merely pointed at Lu Tai's nose as he said in a quiet voice, "Your nose is bleeding again." Lu Tai stopped talking as he wiped away the blood trickling out of his nostrils in a frustrated manner. What he had revealed only concerned Qian Ping'an's great Tao, and it had nothing to do with the state of the world at large, so the backlash that Lu Tai had suffered as a naturalist was far less severe than last time. "Someone's coming from outside," Qian Ping'an suddenly said. Lu Tai took a glance at Qian Ping'an upon hearing this. His senses were just as sharp as a 6th-tier martial artist, and Lu Tai couldn't help but wonder if he really was just a 4th-tier martial artist. With that in mind, he became even more curious about who Qian Ping'an's fist technique mentor was. Right at this moment, a group of people carefully made their way into the training grounds, and they were none other than the old Taoist priest, his disciple Huang Shang, and the Huan siblings. It was the old Taoist priest's decision to have come here instead of going to the main building. While traversing through the forest, he had caught a glimpse of Qian Ping'an and Lu Tai returning to the Flying Eagle Fortress, so he had decided to meet up with Qian Ping'an's duo and ask them about what had become of the devilish cultivator. After that, the 6 of them would travel to the main building together, and that was clearly a safer course of action. The old Taoist priest extended a Taoist salute as he said, "My name is Ma Feifu, and I cultivate on Mandarin Duck Mountain. It's an honor to be in your presence, esteemed immortal Lu." "Esteemed immortal Qian." Lu Tai casually raised a hand to pluck his bamboo fan out of thin air, then gently fanned himself with it as he said, "I come from Middle-earth Divine Continent. I'm from the greatly empire of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent," Qian Ping'an said. "May I ask if you're aware of what's become of that devilish cultivator?" Ma Feifu asked in a careful voice. Lu Tai closed his bamboo fan, then pointed it at the old Taoist priest. Everyone was rather perplexed to see this, but right at this moment the 5 Mountains hat appeared on the tip of Lu Tai's fan, and he smiled as he declared, "He's already dead." Ma Feifu was able to catch a glimpse of the devilish cultivator as he was descending from the sea of clouds to send the 5 Mountains crashing down upon the training grounds, so he immediately recognized the 5 Mountains hat, and was utterly astonished to see the hat currently perched on the end of Lu Tai's bamboo fan. It seemed downright preposterous to him that these 2 young boys had been able to successfully slay what was quite possibly a golden core tier earth immortal, but at the same time, he desperately wanted to believe that Lu Tai was telling him the truth. Even though Ma Feifu was skeptical about what he had heard, he knew that he couldn't risk offending the 2 young boys by openly expressing his doubt, so a look of admiration and a gratitude appeared on his face as he extended another formal salute. "The 2 of you were only passing through this place by chance, yet you were still willing to selflessly pit yourself against that devilish scoundrel, saving the lives of hundreds of Flying Eagle Fortress residents. Please allow me to offer you my sincerest gratitude on behalf of the Flying Eagle Fortress, esteemed immortals." There were tears welling up in the eyes of Huan Chong and Huan Shu, and they hurriedly cupped their fists in grateful salutes while extending deep bows toward Qian Ping'an's duo. "Words cannot express the gratitude that we feel. If you're willing to take me, I would be honored to serve as your most loyal servant and do whatever it is that you ask of me, esteemed immortals," Huan Chong said in an emotional voice. Huan Shu was just as overcome with gratitude and emotion, and she said, "Thank you so very much, young Master Lu, esteemed immortal Qian. I don't know how I could possibly repay you." Meanwhile, Huang Shang was standing at the very back of the group with a complex look on his face. He was wondering to himself whether his cultivation journey would be smoother if he could take these 2 young boys as his masters. Perhaps under their guidance, he would no longer be so incompetent and have to fear for his own life whenever he encountered any demonic forces. He then took a glance at his master, and he silently lowered his head with a guilty look on his face, feeling absolutely wretched for even allowing himself to think such terrible thoughts. However, the thought was only taking root deeper and deeper in his mind the more he tried to denounce it, and before long, it had filled him with such intense guilt that tears were welling up in his eyes as well. All of the emotions currently being experienced by the old Taoist priest and the young trio with him were laid as bare as an open book before Lu Tai. As a naturalist, peering into the hearts of others was his forte. Qian Ping'an didn't possess the same ability. Instead, he was only able to somewhat extrapolate the thoughts and emotions of others based on their expressions and mannerisms. What was akin to an open book in Lu Tai's eyes was shrouded in mystery from his perspective. The group made its way to the main building of the Flying Eagle Fortress, and even though Lu Tai had assured everyone that the crisis had been averted without any casualties being suffered, Huan Chong and Huan Shu were still feeling very uneasy, fearing that they would be greeted by the sight of a horrific slaughter as soon as they opened the gate. Upon arriving at the main building, they discovered that the door was tightly shut, and after some vigorous knocking from Huan Chong, the door was opened by an old man from the Huan clan. The old man immediately burst into tears at sight of the siblings' safe return, and Huan Chong was horrified to see this, fearing that his parents had been killed by the devilish cultivator from before, only to be assured that this was not the case. All of the survivors in the hall felt as if they had been granted a new lease on life. Huan Chong and Huan Shu noticed that their parents weren't in the hall, but when they asked about where their parents were, everyone seemed rather reluctant to respond. Lu Tai had no interest in the Huan clan's family matters, and he led Chan Ping'an to the balcony on the top floor. At this point, Huan Yang was already absent from the ascending sun platform. Lu Tai sat down on the railing and Chan Ping'an followed suit, then began drinking out of his sword-nurturing gourd, tipping his head back to take a long swig. Lu Tai was swinging his feet while gently fanning himself, and with that it was time to split the spoils. We've managed to profit greatly both from this battle and the earlier battle against Ma Wanfa and Do Ziji. Back in my clan, I'm renowned for my luck and my propensity for collecting treasures, but I don't think I've ever reaped so much spoils on my own before. Chan Ping'an smiled in response, and for some reason, the thought of He Xiaoyang sprang into his mind. Just like Lu Tai, she had also been renowned for her exceptional fortune. You can have infatuation and I'll take the 5 Mountains hat, but I'm not taking it for nothing. Instead, I'm purchasing it from you. In return, I'll help you refine and repair that demon-binding chain of yours, and that damaged armor pellet you told me about earlier, the one that you bought from the Ganoderma Inn. You've always been complaining about how the suit of armor is taking up too much space in 15th, haven't you? I can help you restore it to a brand new condition free of charge so that it can revert back into an armor pellet. Don't ask me how I'm going to do it, all I can tell you is that I have my ways. In the meantime, you'll have to stay in the Flying Eagle Fortress, but rest assured it won't be for too long. You can take some time to recover from your injuries here, then go search for that Taoist temple. Chan Ping'an nodded in response. Given how wealthy Lu Tai was, Chan Ping'an certainly wasn't going to feel bad for him. The 5 Mountains hat is a high-grade immortal treasure, so I'll need to give you 20,000 snowflake coins for it, which equates to 20 grain rain coins. I also reaped some additional spoils from slaying Ma Wanfa and that devilish cultivator, and after a rough tally, I've concluded that I'll need to give you another 20,000 snowflake coins or 20 grain rain coins. Among the spoils, that extinguishing worries horsetail whisk handle is a decent treasure. You can take it as a small bonus. You have that many grain rain coins? Chan Ping'an exclaimed in a stunned manner. I have a few grain rain coins here and there, Lu Tai replied with a smile as he continued to look into the distance. In terms of wealth, even the average nascent tier Earth immortal from Middle-earth Divine Continent wouldn't be able to compare with me. Chan Ping'an immediately gave Lu Tai a slap on the shoulder. In that case, why were you pretending to be poor back on Stalactite Mountain? I didn't know you were such a good actor. Lu Tai was feeling a little sheepish and replied, I was worried that you would try and rob me. What a load of bullshit. Chan Ping'an gave Lu Tai another firm slap on the shoulder, and this time Lu Tai was beginning to grow a little disgruntled. Keep your hands to yourself, Chan Ping'an. Chan Ping'an smiled as he gave Lu Tai a third slap. Lu Tai immediately put on an effeminate display as he prepared to unleash his trump card, but Chan Ping'an had already raised a hand to stop him, and he took a sip of wine then prompted, Continue. Lu Tai flipped a hand over to produce an intricately embroidered pouch before handing it to Chan Ping'an. What's this? Chan Ping'an asked. It's a little gift for you, Lu Tai replied with a smile. Open it and take a look. I'm sure you'll like it. It's a batch of elm tree blossom seeds with rather special origins. Once you return home, you can plant it on a mountain with good feng shui. Make sure you plant them in a place with a lot of sun exposure, and perhaps you'll be met with a pleasant surprise in 3 to 5 years. Chan Ping'an accepted the pouch of seeds then said, Tell me exactly what's so special about them. Otherwise, I'm not going to take them. Lu Tai gave Chan Ping'an a brief explanation of what was so special about these seeds, and the latter's expression immediately lit up as he hurriedly stowed the pouch away. As it turned out, this pouch of elm tree blossom seeds was very remarkable, and they were the perfect gift in Qian Ping'an's eyes. These seeds had come from a certain ancient immortal elm tree on Middle-earth Divine Continent, and due to their thin and round shape, they were also known as elm coins. Elm coins were homonymous to the phrase, spare money. Hence, it became a common notion that eating elm coins could grant one spare money, but most people only treated this as an unsubstantiated saying. It was said that all one had to do was find the gold spirit residing in an elm coin, then soak them in a jar of wine until they became inebriated before eating them. If one could do that, then they would be granted some extra income each year. During spring, many wealthy clans would organize elm coin banquets for good fortune and monetary prosperity over the course of the year. Qian Ping'an liked nothing more than these slow and steady streams of income. Deep down, he was still firmly of the belief that wealth that came quickly was also prone to going just as quickly. Either that or such wealth required an immense amount of effort and willpower to keep. In contrast, things like these elm coins, which were supposed to yield a steady stream of small profits over a long period of time, felt much safer and more reliable to Qian Ping'an. Only after the elm coins were firmly secured did Qian Ping'an make a belated attempt at turning down the gift, smiling as he asked, "Isn't this too precious a gift?" Lu Tai was opening and closing his folding fan over and over again as he sighed. "This journey to the ascending sun platform is an integral part of my pursuit of the great Tao. Do you know how much weight those two words carry? I can't even assign it a monetary value. Having said that, seeing as we're friends, how about you let it slide? Otherwise, no matter how wealthy I am, even if I sell off everything that I own, I still won't be able to repay you." "You could easily repay me," Qian Ping'an said with a smile as he offered his sword-nurturing gourd to Lu Tai. Lu Tai accepted the gourd, then threw his head back and took a large swig of wine while keeping the mouth of the sword-nurturing gourd a few inches away from his lips. After that, he wiped his lips before returning the gourd to Qian Ping'an as he said, "You need a refill. I'll get the people at the Flying Eagle Fortress to fill your gourd before we leave." Qian Ping'an naturally wasn't going to turn down such a kind offer. All of a sudden, an exasperated look appeared on Lu Tai's face as he asked, "Why does everyone enjoy drinking wine? What's so good about it?" Qian Ping'an merely smiled and drank in silence. After drinking wine, he dared to think the unthinkable, say the unspeakable, and do the unfeasible. Over the next 10 days, Qian Ping'an continued to live in that small house, but there were no longer any sinister spirits there to bother him. Occasionally, he would sit down on the steps at the entrance of the courtyard, looking at the wall at the end of the valley while thinking about those poor ghostly children and the smiles that they had displayed in their final moments in this world. Lu Tai was staying at the main building, and he would visit Qian Ping'an in his courtyard from time to time, but he would never stay long before departing to busy himself with other matters. 10 days later, Lu Tai returned with an armor pellet that was as good as new, and Qian Ping'an was ecstatic. His arm had already recovered, but it still wasn't back to full strength yet. In addition to the armor pellet, Lu Tai also brought him a sleek blade with a pristine white scabbard, telling him that it was compensation given to him by the Huan clan, and that the Huan clan would feel uneasy if he refused to accept it. On this occasion, Lu Tai stayed for a bit longer, brewing a pot of tea for himself in the courtyard while telling Qian Ping'an about the history of the blade. Many years ago, the nascent tier earth immortal of Peace and Tranquility Mountain had bestowed this blade upon the lumberjack patriarch of the Flying Eagle Fortress in order to quell the sinister feng shui of this place. The blade's name was Halting Snow, and unfortunately, none of the descendants of the Flying Eagle Fortress from that point onward possessed any cultivation aptitude, so the blade was simply passed down as an ornament, which was a terrible waste. Qian Ping'an was aware of how precious this blade was, and he knew that it had most likely been a prized item of that earth immortal from Peace and Tranquility Mountain. After some contemplation, Lu Tai decided that the blade was worth 20 grain rain coins, and he tossed Qian Ping'an a pouch full of grain rain coins for it. Over the following 10 days, Qian Ping'an continued his daily routine of walking meditation, sword practice, sleep and repeat, and he no longer went to look at that wall. As time passed, the emotions that he felt in the wake of those events began to fade, so he no longer felt any obligation to look at the wall. During those 10 days, Lu Tai only came to visit him once, informing him that he had taken 3 disciples, namely Tao Xiang, a young boy by the name of Huang Yin, and Huang Shang, who had ultimately decided to switch masters. As for why he had decided to do this, Lu Tai was unwilling to elaborate beyond telling Qian Ping'an that one couldn't understand good if they didn't interact with evil, which was something that he had already said to Qian Ping'an back on the treasure-swallowing whale. Prior to his departure, Lu Tai told him that he was most likely going to be making this place his long-term home, and that he wouldn't be returning to Middle-earth Divine Continent in the near future. By the time Lu Tai came for his final visit with that demon-binding chain, Qian Ping'an was mostly recovered. Separation was imminent, but neither of them was all that sad. One harbored lofty dreams and aspirations, while the other had only just begun their pursuit of the great Tao, so there was no time to dwell on sadness. Thus they parted ways without much fanfare, with one remaining in the Flying Eagle Fortress, while the other departed northward. Lu Tai didn't accompany Qian Ping'an in his departure. Instead, he merely stood on the ascending sun platform, watching Qian Ping'an's fading figure from afar. He had tried to convince Qian Ping'an to carry both infatuation and halting snow on his waist at once, telling him that it would make him look very badass, but unfortunately, Qian Ping'an didn't take the bait, telling Lu Tai that he wasn't some weapon shop owner. Lu Tai was a little disappointed. If Qian Ping'an had fallen for the trap, then he would have been able to tease Qian Ping'an for being an idiot. As he departed from the Flying Eagle Fortress, Qian Ping'an couldn't help but turn back one final time, but not to look at Lu Tai. Instead, a thought had sprung into his mind, and he felt it to be rather strange, but in the end, he shook his head to rid himself of that train of thought. On the way out of the Flying Eagle Fortress, he passed by a middle-aged man, and he couldn't recall meeting the man anywhere before, but for some reason the man seemed familiar to him. The man noticed Qian Ping'an's inquisitive gaze and a slightly shy smile. It seemed that he was just an ordinary, humble man. After Qian Ping'an was long gone, the man gently stomped a foot down onto the ground, and the restrictions in the area were immediately lifted. If it weren't for those restrictions, there was no way that Planchette Writing Sect would have failed to notice the battle that had taken place on the Sea of Clouds. Lu Tai was leaning against the railing with a smile on his face, watching as the fortune of the land shifted in subtle and profound ways. On a mountain summit several dozen kilometers away, Qian Ping'an was engaged in walking meditation when all of a sudden, he began to miss the taste of Tonghulu. This was rather amusing to him. Given his current wealth, he could easily purchase a pair of Tonghulu from any stall in the next city or town that he reached, and he'd be able to strut around while holding one in each hand.